Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Suzanne Chambers slammed down the brakes of her black SUV so violently hard that the car shook and juddered rather precariously as it came to an abrupt, very sudden, ungainly stop outside the school gates. If Suzanne's husband Niles could see her right now, he'd chastise her for being so cack-handed at parking her car. But Suzanne didn't care about that. Her mind was currently preoccupied with a tapestry of grievous concerns in regards to her teenage daughter Blakely, who had really knocked the wind out of her sails of late, as over the last couple of weeks Blakely had almost become unhinged. Everything had spiralled out of control last night, when Suzanne had uncovered her daughter's dark, rather dirty secret. And let's just say, there's some things as a parent you wish you'd never seen. Suzanne felt as if she was lost at sea, on one of those lifeboats, struggling desperately to find her bearings, and wondering if she would ever make it to shore, for the trajectory of her life seemed to be going downhill very fast, especially after the confrontation she'd had with Blakely last night. She really did feel rather like a pigeon that had got ensnared in the cat's sharp claws, for some of the foul language her daughter had used against her last night had left Suzanne feeling as wilted as a dying flower in a glass vase. Things had been so plain sailing when raising her older daughter Nina, who was now 25 years old, and Nina had given her no problems growing up. She was the kind of daughter that every parent would be delighted to raise as their own. She had been so helpful around the house, so incredibly obliging, and always fun to be around. Suzanne had expected Blakely to follow Nina's lead and be an undemanding teenager, not giving her any tumultuous challenges, but no such luck in that regard. Blakely of late had become the most obnoxious teenager on the face of the planet, as far as Suzanne was concerned, and currently her daughter seemed to only know how to spit out her stinging, very poisonous venom at her mother. And there had been times, over the last couple of weeks, that Suzanne felt like tearing her hair out. She had recently read somewhere that women who didn't have children looked 20 years younger than those that did. And if this was true, well, it came as no surprise to Suzanne. She felt like a 45-year-old woman going on 350. She had noticed several grey hairs had developed on her scalp of late that had not been there only days before. And if that wasn't bad enough, very deeply entrenched frown lines had mysteriously appeared between her brows, which also hadn't been there, and it made her look like a bad-tempered badger. It only served to highlight to Suzanne just how much stress Blakely had recently put her through. Suzanne felt as if she was perilously circumnavigating her life on a pair of roller skates, and clumsily colliding into everything that crossed her path. It would seem her tumultuous relationship with her daughter had become very fragile of late. Even her husband Niles had mentioned that the atmosphere in their house had become so incredibly tense that you could practically cut it with a knife. "Why do I get the funny feeling that you and Blakely are at loggerheads with each other," he had said. "Is there something going on that I should know about?" "I don't know what you're talking about, love." Suzanne had laughed uneasily. "Everything is just fine. I guess I'm overexhausted. I've been running around a lot, you know." "You look more than a little tired, love. There's dark rings around your eyes. And Blakely looks pretty miserable too." "Oh, Blakely. Well, she's just had a little spat with Eloise, I suspect." Suzanne lied. "She'll get over it. You know what teenagers are like." Suzanne was determined not to let her husband Niles know what she had uncovered about her daughter, for there was no knowing how he'd react. Suzanne reflected over Nina, her older daughter, how she'd been when she'd been a teenager. The course with her had run so incredibly smooth, so much so, in fact, that when other parents at the time had complained bitterly about their out-of-control teenagers, Suzanne had felt little sympathy for them, for she didn't really understand or appreciate what they were talking about. But now that her young daughter Blakely had reached the age of 16 and was giving her grief, Suzanne perfectly understood now that not all teenagers were created even. She had no idea how good life had been, raising such an agreeable teenager, until of course she'd experienced the opposite end of the spectrum. Don't get me wrong, Suzanne loved her daughter Blakely very much indeed. She'd have moved heaven and earth for her daughter, and more besides. But at the moment her obstinately cantankerous teenager had become as prickly as a porcupine, and was almost unapproachable. Suzanne's erratic driving that morning had been a sorry, rather beleaguered reflection of the inner turmoil going on inside her. She felt as if her mind was spinning around in circles, like the clothes in a spin-dryer. She could not recall a time in her life when she'd felt so grievously upset, so utterly dismayed, so completely betrayed, not only by her pugnacious daughter Blakely, but by that artful, cunning, scheming woman, Mrs. Laura Ferguson herself. Suzanne felt like an irate bull in a ring, desirous to go after the matador's bright red flag and tear it into shreds. Certainly Suzanne knew that if she owned a pair of formidable horns like a bull did, she knew exactly who she'd like to drive them into right now. If Suzanne ever so much as laid eyes on the likes of Laura Ferguson again, she would personally not be responsible for her actions. Suzanne had never understood why decent people of both sound mind and character committed treasonous acts of murder and unbridled violence. But right now, if she had the guts and the gumption to do it, she would quite literally murder that woman. Who the hell did Laura Ferguson think she was? And how dare she butt her nose into her daughter's life in the intrusive way she'd so obviously done, without even bothering to tell Suzanne about her unethical intentions. The unscrupulous woman hadn't bothered to mention any of this, precisely because she knew how Suzanne would react, and so she had furtively encouraged Blakely to make choices that were not suitable for a 16-year-old girl to make. I should have known that Eloise's mother was a bad influence on Blakely. I should have listened to Niles. Suzanne continued to scold herself as she sat in her SUV, listening to Reva McEntire singing her country western song about her broken heart. And the sad song only made Suzanne feel all the more miserable. Why was it that Suzanne's discerning husband Niles always was right about everything, and she was the one that ended up with egg on her face, looking ridiculously stupid, as she did right now? Suzanne had thought being liberally open-minded and reasonably easy-going about things was the best way to seamlessly conduct your life to a smooth-flowing orchestra. But it seemed her shrewd conservative husband Niles could see the errors in the small print that so easily get overlooked. Suzanne always thought that you should give people a second chance, even if your first impression of them was not very favourable. She recalled when they bought their first home, many years ago, her husband had said in disgust, "We can't possibly live here. The previous owners have left the place in a hideous mess." But Suzanne had seen through the chaos and insisted they bought the house, which they did at a bargain basement price, and Suzanne had painstakingly fixed the place up. And this was a decision that neither of them had regretted, for Suzanne had turned their dump of a home into one of the finest-looking houses on their street. Ostensibly, her husband Niles was quick to point out that houses are exceedingly different to people. Even so, Susan disapproved of judging anyone based on their colour, ethnicity, culture, or even on the way they dressed. She emphatically thought that every individual was entitled to express themselves both freely and individualistically. If they wanted to wear heavy-duty piercings in their ears, dye their hair bright pink or orange, or bungee jump off the Eiffel Tower in Paris, well, it was entirely up to them, was it not? Let's just say the way Laura Ferguson presented herself to the world left a lot to be desired. But that had been no concern to Suzanne, until now, of course, now that the woman's brazen influences had hurt her daughter Blakely, although doubtlessly Blakely wouldn't see it like that. Susan, like any other mother, wouldn't stand for that kind of nonsense. From the moment Suzanne's husband Niles had laid eyes on Laura Ferguson, he had not had anything good to say about the brassy woman. At the time, Suzanne had been affronted by her husband's unfair criticisms of Laura Ferguson, and had immediately leapt to her defence. But not any more. That ship had long since sailed, and Suzanne had had quite enough. You can only poke a gentle dog a few times before it'll finally growl and bite back. Suzanne was about to snap, and if there was anyone's hand she could bite right now, it was Laura Ferguson's, and she'd have loved to have dug her teeth very hard into that woman's flesh. Suzanne had naively, rather ignorantly, believed that just because Laura Ferguson dressed inappropriately and looked as trashy as a hooker standing on a street corner touting for business, didn't mean that she had loose morals. But her husband Niles had disagreed with her on this, saying that if you flaunted yourself like a woman of the night, wearing the most skimpy, revealing outfits, then you were sending out all the wrong signals, and you were going to attract the wrong kind of company. If you hang around in a seedy nightclub, are you going to meet people of high moral fibre? He'd ask his wife. To which Suzanne would reply, What does a seedy nightclub have to do with Laura Ferguson? And Niles had said, It has everything to do with Laura Ferguson, for she would be very much at home in a seedy nightclub, don't you think? What I'm trying to say, love, is I'm not happy with our Blakely going over to the Fergusons' home and spending time with her best friend Eloise under that woman's roof. Laura Ferguson spells trouble to me, in every sense of the word, and I do not like the idea of Blakely being exposed to her promiscuous influences. But you don't know the woman's promiscuous, do you? You're just assuming she's like that. Why are you saying these unkind things? It's uncalled for, Niles. If I wear a short skirt that barely covers my backside, does that suddenly make me promiscuous? Suzanne had snapped angrily. It's not as cut and dried as that, sweetheart, and you know it. It's the whole look of Laura Ferguson. Yes, I admit I am judging her based on her appearances, but I'm sorry the signals she's giving off spell danger to me. If Eloise and Blakely want to spend time together, fair enough, but it needs to be done under our roof, where you can keep a firm eye on both of those girls. I don't trust Laura Ferguson as far as you can throw her, and I categorically believe she will be a bad influence on our daughter. I mean, surely you can at least agree, just from the way she dresses, that she's not a positive role model for any teenage girl. They're impressionable. Imagine if our daughter started dressing like Laura Ferguson. Think about that for a moment. That would be unacceptable. Suzanne had rolled her eyes in exasperation. Oh, I see, Niles. It's like that, is it? You think it's not safe for our daughter to hang around Laura Ferguson because she dresses like a tart. Is that it? Don't you think you're being far too judgmental, far too critical of the poor woman? What has she ever done to you? If that woman wants to dress like a hooker, that's her business, don't you think? She's free to express herself the way she likes. She likes to dress provocatively, and some women do, don't they? But that does not make her a bad person. And it certainly doesn't mean that Blakely can't spend time at Eloise's home, does it? I'm not being judgmental. Niles had said. "I'm saying it as it is, love, even though I know you don't like what I'm saying. I just don't want our Blakely being influenced by a woman like that, who probably doesn't even own a skirt big enough to cover her derriere. Everything hangs out with her on full visual display, and I'm sorry, but it's vulgar. That woman is cheap and trashy, as brassy as you can get, and she's drawing unpleasant, unwanted attention to herself, and enjoying every second of it, I'm most sure. I don't want our Blakely getting caught up in company like that. It could potentially have a negative impact on her life. And as I keep saying, the next thing we know, Blakely could be wearing a skirt that does very little to cover up her modesty. Don't get me wrong, I like Eloise very much. She's a sweet kid. But it's that mother of hers that is a walking liability. I know I don't know her, but I've seen enough to make a judgment of her, and my opinion is not a good one." "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Niles. Listen to yourself, love. You're being so priggishly stuffy, so overly dramatic, so straight-laced. Yes, I agree with you to a certain extent. Laura Ferguson, well, the way she dresses, it doesn't leave much to the imagination. When I see her outside the school gates, going to collect her daughter, I do sometimes wish I had the courage to tell her that she looks so much nicer if she wore something more modest. But it's not my place to say anything, is it? What she chooses to wear is none of my business. It's a free world as far as I'm concerned. It shouldn't be so free that a mother of a young girl walks around the place so scantily clad that she might as well be wearing absolutely nothing." "Well, you're not alone in your thoughts, Niles," said Suzanne. "I think most of the mothers at school disapprove very passionately about the way Laura dresses, but I think they may finally be beginning to understand that that is who Laura Ferguson is. She likes to dress trashy. I think it's undignified to have everything hanging out in the way she does. Who are we to judge her for the way she dresses or the choices she makes? If you must know, Laura Ferguson told me in confidence, rather proudly, that she'd spent a fortune on plastic surgery after acquiring a great deal of money from a hefty divorce settlement. She told me she wanted to reinvent herself, and that is what she's inevitably done. I remember she teasingly joked that she didn't spend all this money on her assets not to enjoy them to the fullest. I think her exact words were to me, 'If I had a whopping diamond ring, I wouldn't let it gather dust in the safe, would I? Instead, I'd wear it on my finger every day so people could admire it.' That's what she says she feels about her brand new body that she acquired from the surgeon's masterful scalpel. That didn't come cheap, I believe. I'll have you know she told me the money she spent on her body could have purchased a brand new home for herself." "You are joking," said Niles in disgust. "She could have bought a property with the money she spent revamping herself? Are you kidding me? What a waste of money." "Pretty much. Don't look so shocked, Niles. Some women, especially celebrities, you know, spend great big bucks on plastic surgery. It's not unheard of. Don't tell me you don't know that already." "What exactly did she have done?" asked Niles. "I understand she had liposuction, a tummy tuck, massively large breast implants, but you probably know that already, and a facelift, and she says she feels as if she's 23 again. And I say good on her. Go, girl." "She looks like a Barbie doll," Niles said rather heartlessly, "and that is not meant as a compliment. That was money very badly spent. I bet she looked 1,000 times better when she entered the surgeon's office than when she left it. Does she really think men think she's sexy? Honestly, the natural look is what most decent men like. Who wants to date a woman that looks like a made-up doll, with breasts so enormously large they look completely out of place, as if she's a comical cartoon character that everybody laughs at? I know I certainly don't appreciate a woman looking so fake. I'm sorry, love, everything about her is artificial, and that's why I'm so suspicious of her. Has she got a boyfriend? Because I'd like to know what he thinks about her radical transformations. I bet he's not a happy bunny." Well, from what Blakely tells me, Laura Ferguson does not just have one boyfriend, love, but many interested admirers, shall we say. Apparently they come to the house regularly, armed with bouquets of flowers and bottles of wine. So it seems there are men out there that fully appreciate Laura Ferguson's assets, even if men like yourself don't. In case you've forgotten, sometimes beauty is in the eye of the beholder, love. Niles had looked at Suzanne in horror. His eyes widened in dismay. Blakely told you that about all these men? Coming over to Laura Ferguson's house with flowers and wine? My God, I didn't know things were as bad as this. You never told me. There is no prizes for guessing what these men want from Laura Ferguson. Are you telling me, while our Blakely is spending time with Eloise under the Ferguson roof, that Eloise's mother is entertaining men in her own bedroom? I'm sorry, love. That's not appropriate, nor is it acceptable. I don't want our daughter being exposed to that. She's just turned 16, for goodness sake. Kids at her age are influenced by the environments they grow up in. That's why children who have parents who smoke all the time usually end up smoking themselves. Haven't you heard the saying, you become like the company you keep? Never was a truer word ever spoken. What are you saying? Suzanne had protested rather indignantly. That our Blakely is going to end up dressing up like Laura Ferguson and entertaining all kinds of young men. Don't be ridiculous, Niles. Credit our daughter with a little common sense, would you? Blakely's a sensible kid. She knows that Laura Ferguson is over the top in every aspect of her life, and I very much doubt she wants to emulate that woman's tasteless example. I'm not being ridiculous, love. I'm being deadly serious. I don't want Blakely spending time in Laura Ferguson's house. That woman will not be a good influence on Blakely. Why can't you see that? You seem to be defending her just because she's female. But look at the way she dresses. She's an absolute embarrassment. A train wreck, if you ask me. I certainly feel sorry for Eloise being exposed to her mother's vulgarities. I can only conclude that Laura Ferguson is extremely unstable, desperately insecure, and certainly attention-seeking. To go to such extremes with plastic surgery, well, that exposes all that, as far as I'm concerned. And let's just say there is nothing worse than a woman that is not comfortable in her own skin. So she has to go about changing everything about herself. That's a real red flag to me, love. I don't think it's as straightforward as that, Suzanne had said. I think that Laura Ferguson has issues. That's probably why she dresses the way she does. Maybe getting attention from men makes her feel better about herself, boosts her self-esteem, so to speak. I think many women are like that, you know. A lot of women feel insecure about their bodies. Too right, Laura Ferguson has issues. I couldn't have put it better myself, said Niles. You only have to look at the way she dresses to know that. I was picking Blakely up from school the other day and bumped into the woman. The skirt she was wearing, it was pathetic. It was so short. Oh, I didn't even know where to look. It screams out insecure to me, louder than any danger sign would. Which is why I keep telling you, love, that we should keep Blakely well away from the Fergusons. You don't know the whole story, Niles, about Laura Ferguson. Maybe if you did, you'd be more sympathetic and more understanding and compassionate towards her. As I keep telling you, she's not all bad, you know. Don't they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover? You, of all people, I would have thought would know that. Don't people deserve a chance? Imagine if someone turned up for an interview with you wearing shoddy clothes, simply because they didn't have enough money to buy anything decent. Are you going to turn them away when they could potentially turn out to be the greatest asset to your company? Look, love, I never said Laura Ferguson was a bad person, did I? You misunderstand me completely. I'm saying the immoral way she dresses is cause for great concern. Whether she's nice or not, I don't care. For the record, if someone rocked up in an interview in my offices looking dishevelled, forgive me for being so shallow, but that would concern me greatly. There are, for the record, lots of immoral people out there that can be very nice, but it doesn't change the fact that they are immoral. and hanging around them is a very big mistake. When you hang around people of ignoble character, it changes who you become. If our daughter hung around people who shoplifted for the hell of it, or experimented with drugs, do you really think she wouldn't be tempted to do exactly the same? Especially at such a young age as she is now, only 16 years old. Teenagers always like to follow the crowd. If their friends smoke, they want to smoke as well. If their friends take drugs, they want to take drugs as well. If their friends shoplift, they will do it as well. It's just the way it is, especially with youngsters these days. They like to fit in and be accepted by their peers. It's very, very important to them. I know what you're trying to say, Niles, but let me explain to you something about Laura Ferguson for you to fully understand. Put yourself in Laura Ferguson's shoes for a moment, Niles, will you? Said Suzanne rather sharply. Laura told me that at the time she wondered why her husband had walked off and abandoned her and their daughter. So in her depression and lugubrious melancholia, she began to eat gallons of ice cream to comfort herself. She ballooned from £140 to £300. I'm not sure if she's exaggerating about that. I can't imagine the woman was ever big. She told me when she heard her ex-husband had remarried and now had a new wife that was expecting a baby, she got so mad. She drove around to his new address and spied on the new wife to see what the woman was like. I guess she was comparing herself to the woman. She thought that her ex-husband had exchanged her for a better model, found himself a more attractive woman, and I think that hit her so hard. So she decided to do something about it. She went on a strict diet, lost tons of weight, and she told me she wanted her ex-husband to realize what he'd lost by reinventing herself, so that is what she did. She opted for some radical surgeries. She now feels confident about herself and claims she's living her life to the fullest, and I commend her for that. Your criticism of her is heartless, Niles. Rejection can be so destroying for a woman, you know. So rather than being so judgmental towards her, can't you be a wee bit sympathetic? I'm quite sure Laura Ferguson can be trusted to watch over Blakely when she's over at Eloise's house. I mean, look at her daughter Eloise. That young girl is a lovely young lady. So Mrs. Ferguson is doing something right, because her daughter is very well put together, very grounded, don't you think? Laura Ferguson's obviously had it tough, Niles agreed. I commend her for getting her act together, I really do, and for raising a very eloquent, well-behaved young lady as a daughter. But it doesn't take away the fact that she's deeply insecure, and inviting all those men around to her house is not a good look. And I don't want Al Blakely being exposed to all that. Why is that so hard for you to understand, love? It's common sense, isn't it? Look at the story about the woman in the jungle raised by monkeys. She became like a monkey. I don't want our daughter, God forbid, turning into Laura Ferguson. That would be my worst nightmare being realized. What do you mean? You don't want our daughter exposed to that? Big deal, Laura Ferguson invites a man over to the house from time to time, when our daughter is spending time with Eloise under her roof. What harm can be done over that? The children are together, aren't they? They probably don't even notice what Laura Ferguson is getting up to. I'm quite sure she's very discreet about her relationships with other men. Open your eyes, love. You're sounding foolish. I'm sorry, but I'm going to spell it out to you. Laura Ferguson dresses like a hooker. She probably has the morals of an alley cat. I didn't want to say that, but I'm going to say it. For the record, I very much doubt that she knows the meaning of the word discreet, from what Blakely is saying about the men that rock up at her house, while both Eloise and Blakely are there. How can she allow that to happen? She should not be entertaining men with the kids around. I wouldn't be surprised if Laura Ferguson's house hasn't turned into a bus station, with all the men heading for destination Laura Ferguson. I don't want any weird men like that hanging around our Blakely, any more than I'd want her to hang around a field of landmines. Something's going to explode. She's 16 years old, for goodness sake. Keep your hair on, love. If there is a man at Laura Ferguson's house, I very much doubt he's going to be hanging around a couple of 16-year-old kids, let me tell you. Blakely and Eloise are best friends now. Do you really want to drive a wedge between the two of them? They like each other so much, and Blakely thoroughly enjoys spending time at Eloise's home, and vice versa. You can't take that away from our daughter, surely not. They've only known each other for a few months now, and Blakely has never had a best friend like Eloise before. Give her a break, won't you? I've never seen her so happy. She never made many friends at the school before Eloise came along. They really connected. They're both reasonably athletic, love nature and indigenous wild animals. They have so much in common. Would you deny our daughter a best friend like this? Look, love, I'm not laying down the law. I'm giving you advice. If you want Blakely to spend time with Eloise at the Ferguson house, be my guest. I'm not going to stop you from doing it. But let me tell you this. If Blakely starts playing up, I'm not going to be the one that says I told you so. And if I hear that any of those men that Laura Ferguson has been entertaining at her house have been chatting inappropriately to our girl, there will be hell to pay. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm relying on you, love, to do the right thing by our daughter. Think about everything I've told you, and you make the decisions. I'm not here all the time, so I can't stop you from doing what you're going to do. But I'm trusting you to watch Laura Ferguson very carefully, as if your life depended on it. As Suzanne reflected over her husband's sagacious words, she realised they'd come back to bite her. Niles had been absolutely right about Laura Ferguson all along. The woman was a bad influence on her daughter, if Blakely's petulant, cantankerous outbursts were anything to go by. Blakely had admitted that when nobody was around that Laura Ferguson swore like a sailor, which was why when her belligerent daughter had sworn at her last night, when they'd had an altercation together, that Susan had been horrified by the filth that had come out of her daughter's mouth, that needed to be rinsed out with soap and water. Her husband's words rang in her head like a resounding bell. You become like the company you keep. I don't even know Laura Ferguson terribly well, she told herself, but I trusted a perfect stranger to watch over my girl, whom my husband didn't believe deserved to be trusted, and he was right about that. Suzanne watched the mothers very eagerly descend upon the school, rather like a flock of geese, where they'd parked their cumbersome, rather ungainly SUVs, one behind each other, in a somewhat straight file. The only car that stuck out rather unevenly was Suzanne's car. Many mothers had abandoned their parked cars and were patiently waiting outside the school gates, under the umbrella-like shade of a large, lofty oak tree. They were chatting away happily together, as they waited for their kids to finally exit the school gates. Normally Suzanne would have joined in the happy chatter, for she was quite popular among the local mothers, for she had an outgoing and friendly personality that people tended to warm to at once. But on this rather depressingly bleak morning, social interaction was the last thing on Suzanne's mind. There were more pressing issues at stake. There was definitely a positive, upbeat vibe in the air this morning. This was the beginning of the school summer holidays, so there was a buzz of excitement and energy in the atmosphere that was so tangible you could practically touch it. It was always like this when the school closed for the holidays. The term was ending very early today, at 11 p.m. Currently all the pupils were in the assembly hall, where there would be prayers and singing, and then a few words were given to the pupils from the headmistress herself, after which she would excuse all the pupils, wishing them all the best for their summer holidays. Many pupils would obviously be heading off to enjoy the summer holidays, probably somewhere warm, sunny and even exotic, for some of the kids that attended the school had affluent parents that weren't short of a bob or two. Suzanne's fingers tightened their grip on the steering wheel. She clenched her hands together in a powerful fist. Her blood began to boil as she observed Laura Ferguson climbing out of her pink sports car and swanning over to the school gates, gyrating her hips as she did so rather provocatively, as if she was walking past a building site and was expecting all the men working there to whistle at her appreciatively. This was the wrong place to be drawing attention to herself, for her less than appreciative audience was a bunch of school mothers, who as usual gave her some rather condescending, disapproving glances. Suzanne wanted to climb out of her SUV ran up to Laura Ferguson and boxed her ears as hard as she could, while wiping the smug, self-satisfied look off her perfectly made-up face. Laura Ferguson this morning was wearing very high red platform heels, a thin red belt around her middle, and a tight leopard skin mini dress that was so inappropriately immodest it barely covered her derriere, and if she bent down to touch her toes, Laura was certain you'd probably see her panties, if she was wearing any, that is. Suzanne was beginning to wonder if someone like Laura Ferguson even owned a pair. Nothing would surprise Suzanne about that woman, for Laura Ferguson took the word indecent to a whole new level. She wasn't popular with the other mothers, who seemed to willfully ignore her when she waited at the school gates for her daughter Eloise, as they clearly disapproved of the way she dressed and saw her as the kind of loose woman they wanted to stay well away from, as if they thought she was slightly balmy and not quite right in the head. It seemed these mothers were a whole lot more discerning than Suzanne had been, who had given Laura Ferguson the benefit of the doubt. 6 months ago, when Laura Ferguson's daughter Eloise had arrived at the school as a new girl in town, Suzanne had felt sorry for Laura Ferguson and believed she had been unfairly misjudged by everyone who laid eyes on her. People could be so nasty, and not one mother at the school gates had made Laura Ferguson feel remotely welcome, and Suzanne had been appalled by their disdainful, snobby attitudes as they looked down upon Laura Ferguson as something rather unfortunate that the cat had dragged in. Suzanne had scolded some of the mothers for their haughty, stuck-up attitude towards Laura Ferguson, and the mothers had reacted rather indignantly, saying, "Are you serious, Suzanne? You want us to be friends with the likes of her? Look how she dresses. We don't want her hanging around our children. No thanks, not over our dead bodies." After what had happened last night, when Suzanne flew off the handle with her daughter, it had become only too clear to her that Laura Ferguson was not the kind of person you could trust. She was irresponsible in every sense of the word. Laura Ferguson had never been bothered by the mothers at school, who chose to ignore her. She even told Suzanne that they were jealous of how she looked, and felt threatened by her. "I mean, can you blame them for having a touch of the green-eyed monster?" she had chuckled. "I mean, look at them, and look at me. I'm such a sex kitten. They have nothing on me, do they? No wonder they're so jealous." Why did I ever let my daughter spend any time at the Ferguson household? Then none of this would have happened. Suzanne chastised herself. All of a sudden she decided to phone her older daughter Nina, who was 25 years old. She had long since left home, but Suzanne was very close to her beloved daughter, and they touched base every day. Nina was working as a successful accountant for an all-American company and loved her job, but Laura instinctively felt that Nina might be able to offer her some words of wisdom, as Nina had not been a teenager that long ago, and might have some invaluable seeds of advice to offer her mother. The last thing Suzanne wanted was to tell her husband Niles about the huge row she'd had with Blakely the previous night, and thank God he hadn't been home to witness the commotion between the two of them, for she knew her husband would be incensed if he knew about what Suzanne had just discovered in her daughter's nightstand. Doubtlessly Niles would be telling Suzanne that he had warned her religiously that Laura Ferguson needed to be watched like a hawk, and would be a profoundly negative influence on their daughter's life, and it had turned out her husband was right on the money about that. Suzanne glanced briefly towards the school gates, and then at her clock on the dashboard. She sighed with relief. It was 15 minutes to 11 o'clock, and the kids only exited the school gates at 11, so Suzanne had time to make a quick call to Nina. It was with trembling, rather reluctant fingers she pressed Nina's number onto her cell phone, and impatiently waited for her daughter to answer, even though she knew Nina was at work, and now was probably not an appropriate time to call her. But Suzanne had to speak to someone about Blakely right now, and she didn't want to confide in her husband about this issue, for she knew she'd hear him bellow down at her on the phone. "How could you let this happen, love? Did I not warn you about this woman? But you were too bloody-minded, weren't you, to listen to me?" Suzanne didn't want to hear him saying, "I told you so," for she could well do without all that drama. Last night had been very tough on her rather delicate constitution, and she felt as if she'd been put through a mincemeat grinder. It was better her husband Niles didn't know about any of this, and she'd like to keep it that way if she could. "Mum!" came Nina's voice. "This is a surprise. You don't usually call me this early. What on earth is up with you?" Suzanne began to shake uncontrollably, her body wobbling like a jelly. She knew if she didn't hold it together, she'd probably fold up like a camping chair and recoil from the world. Suddenly she began to sob down the phone, as tears spilled down her cheeks, and there was no way of stopping the deluge. "Mum! What's wrong? You're crying. Are you all right? Has something happened? You're scaring me, Mum. Someone hasn't died, have they? Please, God, someone hasn't died." Suddenly Suzanne managed to find her voice, even though it was rather scratchy. "Oh, ignore me. Ignore me, love. I'm just very upset, that's all." Nina could hear her mother blowing her nose very hard into a tissue. "Oh, you'll be glad to know. No one is dead." "Well, that's a relief, Mum. You had me going for a moment. I've never heard you sound this distressed before. What on earth is going on with you?" "I'm sorry, love. I didn't mean to scare you like that. I'm just so upset, so very upset. My emotions, they're all over the place." "I can see that, Mum. What's wrong? Spell it out, will you? I'm worried sick hearing you in such a dreadful state like this. It's not like you to fall apart. It's totally out of character for you." "Your father was right, Nina. Much as I hate to say it, because I don't like it when your father is right, especially when it's usually about every damned thing. But I've been such an idiot. Why on earth did I not listen to him? He told me emphatically that Laura Ferguson was a bad influence on Blakely. I told him he was overreacting, and he was being mean about the poor woman. But it turns out he was right all along. Why am I such a fool? I feel like a prize idiot, I really do." "Mum, for goodness sake, don't talk about yourself like this. You're not an idiot, do you hear me? You're not an idiot. Now get those disingenuous ideas right out of your head now. I don't want to hear you speaking badly about yourself. You're a good person, Mum, and whatever has upset you, I'm sure we can sort it out together. Now take a deep breath, will you? In and out, and tell me what's going on." Suzanne barely heard Nina's words. She suddenly said, "Oh, goodness gracious me. I've just seen Laura Ferguson sashaying up to the school gates. Oh, she thinks she's some kind of sex goddess. She wants everyone to look at her, you know. Pity she hasn't got an appreciative audience. The women standing there at the school gates, waiting for their children, refuse to associate with the likes of her. I used to think they were being spitefully vindictive. I really did. But now I get it. I completely get it. I'm telling you, Nina, I want to kill the woman. I hate that obnoxious woman. You hear me? I hate her, like I've never hated anyone more in my entire life. I now know why some people commit murder. Because if I had the guts, Nina, and if I wasn't such a wimp that followed the law like the goody two-shoes that I so obviously am, I'd wring her neck right now. And I don't say that lightly. Right now, Nina, I can honestly say this. I'm capable of murder." "Mum, relax. Why are you speaking like this? You're so frantic. It's so unlike you to speak like this. What has happened to rattle your cage? Of course you don't really mean that you want to murder the woman. But what has she done to make you so incongruously irate? Who is Laura Ferguson anyway? You've never mentioned her to me before. And why do you hate her so much? I don't understand. What has the woman done?" "Well, I don't even know where to start. Laura Ferguson is Eloise's mother. I'm sure you know about Eloise. She's Blakely's new best friend. They haven't known each other very long. Eloise only started at Blakely's school about 6 months ago. But I wish to God that girl had never come to the school. None of this would have ever happened otherwise. Everything's gone completely pear-shaped. since the two of them became best friends. Don't get me wrong, Nina. Eloise is a very sweet kid. Bless her heart. But it's her mother. Well, there are no words good enough to describe how completely irresponsible that woman is. Oh, yes, I know all about Eloise from Blakely. I understand she and Blakely rarely hit it off. But you're saying the mother is not that nice. The way you're talking about her sounds alarming. What on earth has she done, Mum, to cause you so much distress? You mean what hasn't she done? Is a better question to ask, love. She wants to destroy Blakely's innocence. She wants to rob my daughter of still enjoying her youth. She wants my daughter to grow up before her due time. She's a snake in the grass, let me tell you. Your father warned me about her, but I wouldn't listen, would I? No, I thought I knew better. I thought everyone was being so unreasonable to Laura Ferguson, unnecessarily unkind towards the woman. But I was wrong. Why didn't I listen to your father? Look, Mum, I wish you'd stop putting yourself down like this. You're in such a dreadful state, and it isn't good for your health. You'll end up having a heart attack if you carry on this way. You still haven't answered my question. Why do you hate Laura Ferguson so much? I've never known you to say a bad word about anyone before. What did she do to make you so incensed? It takes a lot to make you mad, Mum. Why don't you start from the very beginning, so I can make sense of it all? Otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, you're talking in riddles. You're saying that Laura Ferguson, who is Eloise's mother, is not a good person. I've established that much. Now please go on, will you? So I can understand what she's done to upset you so much. Right now, I'm imagining all kind of wild scenarios. You're saying Dad didn't approve of this woman. That's right. Your discerning father saw right through her, as if she was a pane of glass. Why did Dad have such a bad reaction to this woman? He's a shrewd judge of character, you know. If he didn't like her, I'd take quick notice of his criticism. Look at how successful Dad's become. I mean, he has a team at work of the most incredibly hard-working, skilled people. And when people applied for jobs with him, he knew how to pick out the people he could trust, rather like separating the wheat from the shard. Am I not a good judge of character? Is that what you're trying to say, Nina? Mum, I wish you wouldn't take everything to heart. I'm not saying that. Please don't put words in my mouth. You still didn't answer my question, did you? Why does Dad not like Mrs. Ferguson? Well, he doesn't like the way she dresses. He thinks it's very inappropriate. To tell you the truth, he's right. She does dress quite badly. How badly? Asked Nina. Well, she dresses like a hooker. Skirts and dresses that barely cover her backside. Very skimpy tops and blouses, where everything hangs out, almost purposely so. And I'm not exaggerating either. Nothing is left to the imagination, if you know what I mean. Let's just say if she rolled up to an office job looking like she does, she'd be fired on the spot. She sometimes comes to the school gates, wearing provocative nurses' outfits and stuff like that. She dresses up in all kinds of suggestive gear. And I think most of the mothers think she's lost her marbles completely. But what do? I decide to give the woman the benefit of the doubt. Good Lord! What you're telling me doesn't sound good at all, Mum. Don't get me wrong. It's a free world. People can dress as they like. But for a mother to arrive at the school gates to pick up her daughter, dressed up provocatively in a nurse's outfit, or God knows what else, well, that's scandalous as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry, but it is. It's her daughter I feel very sorry for. If you'd picked me up from school dressed like that when I was 16 years old, I'd have been so embarrassed. I'd have dug a hole for myself in the school playground and buried myself deep inside it. I'd have pretended you weren't my mother. Can you imagine anything worse than your mother picking you up from school looking like a hooker? Kids care about what people think about their parents. And at 16, your parents can be embarrassing enough, without them rocking up at the school gates looking as if they work in a brothel. I can't imagine the mean things the kids would say to me at school if you'd looked like that back then. Kids can be heartlessly cruel. I remember when I was at school, one of my friends had a mother who'd been burnt in a fire. Her face looked dreadful. The poor woman had gone through numerous facial procedures, and she'd lost one eye. The cruel names the children called the mother were too terrible for words. Luckily our headmistress nipped the kids' cruelty in the bud, telling the pupils that the woman had gone into a burning building to rescue her cat, and it was a miracle that she was alive, and so was the cat. And if anyone dared to make fun of her again, there'd be hell to pay. So thankfully no one ever dared to tease that girl again about her mother. How horrible for the kids to tease someone about their mother like that, because she was caught up in a fire. You never told me that story, love. Come to think of it, though, you do make a good point. Eloise does look desperately embarrassed by her mother. When her mother greets her at the school gates, I notice she pulls away from her. Let's just say she definitely distances herself from her. What did I tell you, Mum? Kids that age are sensitive, and things parents do can embarrass them. Go on with your story. Surely you aren't upset with a woman about the way she dresses. You wouldn't worry about that. Something bigger is going on. Spill, Mum. What has this woman done to make you hate her so much? Right now, Nina, just so you know my whereabouts, I'm sitting in my SUV talking to you outside the school gates. It's the end of the term, you see. The kids are breaking up for the summer holidays. And as I was telling you, I saw Mrs. Ferguson walking past my SUV to the school gates. Luckily, she didn't notice me. I'm not kidding, love. I really meant it when I said I wanted to jump out and pounce on her. But thanks to our telephone conversation, and for the fact that I refused to get out of my car, I restrained myself from doing so. I really want to kill that woman, and I'm not joking about that, Nina, either. Good, Mum. I'm glad you didn't get out of the car. While you're in this volatile state, I suggest you remain exactly where you are. We wouldn't want you to be charged with murder, came Nina's teasing voice. It's not funny, Nina. None of this is funny. Not remotely amusing. I know, Mum. That was probably an inappropriate thing for me to say. So tell me from the beginning, why have you grown to despise this woman so much? Well, I didn't have any problems with Laura Ferguson from the very beginning, but your father invariably did. We argued about this a great deal, because I believed he was being unreasonably judgmental. Your father wanted Eloise only to ever come to our house, but he didn't want Blakely spending time at the Fergusons, and that didn't feel right to me. So against your father's salient wishes, I'm afraid to say, I did allow Blakely to spend time at Eloise's house. I thought it was a completely harmless thing to do. But your father was dead set against it. He thought Laura Ferguson, based on the skimpy, inappropriate way she presents herself, would be a bad influence on our Blakely. But I told him he was wrong about that. And I was going to do things my way, whether he liked it or not, as the kids enjoyed spending time at each other's houses. And I thought, although Mrs. Ferguson was rather unorthodox, at the end of the day, I thought underneath all the layers, she was probably a pretty decent person. Oh, Mum, you're a big softy, aren't you? You've always believed the best in people, and that's a great quality to have. Don't ever change that about yourself. Well, I felt sorry for Laura Ferguson, didn't I? The woman had had a very tough life. One day when Eloise was only 10 years old, Eloise's father walked out on Eloise and her mother, without any rhyme or reason from what I've been told. Although, to be fair, I don't know his side of the story. I understand Mr. Ferguson demanded a divorce, and a while later he got remarried. It was a crushing blow for Laura Ferguson, who was left wondering what she'd done to make her husband abruptly leave in the way he did. I think her self-esteem plummeted to an all-time low. So she reinvented herself, had numerous surgeries to make herself look like a Barbie doll, you could say, with oversized breasts and the bleached blonde hair. You know the look. She did succeed in her endeavours, I will give her that. Does she look like a Barbie doll? Nina inquired. Oh, she does look like a Barbie doll, in a manner of speaking, but a Barbie doll on the more mature side, if you know what I mean. I think Mrs. Ferguson is about 49 years old. Anyway, when I met her, I thought she was a nice enough person who needed to be commended for picking up the pieces of her life and getting on with it. And I thought your dad was being unreasonably judgmental towards her. Well, Mum, I can understand that Dad would be concerned about the way Laura Ferguson was dressing in front of, in front of Blakely. I mean, if she was letting it all hang out and rocking up at the school dressing like a sexy nurse, I'm sorry, but that is cause for great concern. I would find that deeply troubling. It's certainly not appropriate for a mother to present herself in such an undignified way, not when she has a teenage kid to consider. She needs to be a positive role model for her daughter, doesn't she? Don't get me wrong. I applaud Mrs. Ferguson for picking up the pieces of her life in the way she did after a nasty divorce. And yes, maybe all that surgery made her feel better about herself, and that's not a bad thing. But it doesn't excuse the way she presents herself. That's not excusable. Well, I wasn't worried about the attention-seeking, provocative way that Laura was dressing. I thought it was harmless enough, and frankly it didn't bother me, love. I just thought Laura Ferguson was an insecure woman, inwardly screaming for validation, which is why she'd had the numerous surgeries in the first place. Your father was worried about the message Mrs. Ferguson was sending, wearing such revealing clothes. And it wasn't just that. But Blakely was telling us that Laura Ferguson was entertaining a lot of strange men at her house when she went around there to play with, with Eloise. So when I'm saying a lot of men, I mean a lot. Your dad was worried about all these strange men rocking up at the Fergusons' household when Blakely was around. I persuaded him that Laura Ferguson was probably discreet about her romantic liaisons with these men. I told your father he was getting all heated up about nothing. But it turns out I was wrong. Very wrong. I'm sorry, Mum, but I'm taking Dad's side on this. I can't believe how naive you've been. Surely you realise that it's not good for Blakely to hang around a house with strange men coming and going as they please. That's not good for any teenager to see. I'm sorry, but it's not. It sounds like Laura Ferguson was running a brothel. And would you really want Blakely to witness this? It's scandalous, if you ask me. I can't believe you don't know that, Mum. I mean, Blakely and Eloise are vulnerable teenagers. Oh, they think they're grown up, don't they? But the truth is they're very immature, with a whole lot of growing up to do. When I was 16, Mum, I also thought I was all grown up. I thought I knew it all. But in truth I knew so very little. And even now at 25 years old, I still realise I've got a whole lot of learning to do. But for Mrs. Ferguson to be behaving like that, in her own house, in front of her own teenage daughter, and the likes of Blakely, is shocking. I'm not surprised Dad was upset by all this. What if one of those random men made overtures towards Blakely? Did you stop to think about that for a second? Blakely's 16 years old, Mum, and if Mrs. Ferguson's entertaining seedy, creepy men around at her house that are clearly only interested in the woman for one thing, how do you know they wouldn't make overtures towards the likes of Blakely or Eloise, for that matter? Well, I wasn't viewing things in that direction, actually, love. But now I'm realising the errors of my ways. I should have listened to your father. You should have, Mum. He did know what he was talking about. Sorry, go on with the story. When did you start despising Laura Ferguson? Well, last night, when your father was away on business, I discovered something really bad. But as for Mrs. Ferguson, I think I started disliking her about 2 weeks ago, when Blakely started playing up and using vulgar curse words I dare not repeat. I lost it with her, I really did. We were fighting each other like cat and dog, let me tell you. Blakely kept telling me how much she hated me. She told me I was the worst mother in the entire world, and that she liked Laura Ferguson because Mrs. Ferguson let her do anything she liked. But I was far too strict. She told me in no uncertain terms, when she turned 18 years old, she'd walk out of our home forever and never see me again. That's rough, Mum. I can't believe Blakely was cursing you like that. But you know she was letting off steam. She loves you, Mum, She'd never walk out on you, if that's what you're worried about. No, that is not what I'm worried about, Nina. I know that Blakely didn't mean what she said, and I know she loves me. But you don't want to know what happened last night. It just makes me sick to my stomach to even think about it. I can't possibly tell your father about it, or he'd absolutely lose it. 2 weeks ago, Laura Ferguson took Blakely and Eloise to go shopping, at some rather erotic store if you ask me, buying both the girls inappropriate clothes. I'm talking about the skimpiest bikinis you have ever seen in your entire life. Skirts so short they leave nothing to the imagination. And tops that you could barely describe as tops because they don't do anything to cover your modesty. I had a huge altercation with Blakely about those clothes. I took them straight to the dumpster and discarded them at once. She was absolutely furious with me and had quite the tantrum. She told me I was a dreadful mother and that she hated me. She told me the clothes were sexy and she wanted to wear them. That really wound me up, let me tell you. I told her if her father saw any of these clothes that Mrs. Ferguson had bought for her, that he'd probably never ever allow her to go over to the Ferguson house again. And so I was doing her a big favour by getting rid of those clothes. But I don't understand, Mum. Why would Mrs. Ferguson buy Eloise and Blakely such inappropriate clothes? It sends out the wrong message. I hope you told Mrs. Ferguson not to do it again. I hope you had words with her.
Yes, of course I did, Nina. I contacted the woman and told her not to buy Blakely any clothes. I said it was kind of her to do so, but that was my job as her parent. I told her that I did feel that the clothes she had purchased were inappropriate for a teenager to be wearing.
Good for you, Mum. What did she say to that?
Well, she laughed at me, scoffed a bit, you know. I think she told me I was being dramatic and I should let my hair down. She thought I took life far too seriously and was being far too straight-laced about everything. She said Blakely wanted to look sexy, and so did Eloise, and that there was nothing wrong with teenagers wanting to do that. I told her I didn't want a 16-year-old girl of mine going around with clothes that barely covered her backside, so Mrs. Ferguson told me that in future she wouldn't buy any more clothes for Blakely. And I was relieved about that, grateful that I'd sorted the problem out. Well, so I thought.
Well, I'm glad you talked to her, Mum. That's a positive start. Go on, Mum. Get it all out. What else did Mrs. Ferguson do?
Well, yesterday afternoon, when Blakely was still at school doing after-school gymnastics, I decided to clear up her bedroom. I'm afraid Blakely has become so scruffy of late, throwing her clothes all over the place, in a higgledy-piggledy mess, leaving plates and coffee mugs all over the floor, spilling over the carpet and everything. It's disgusting. And so I couldn't bear it a moment longer. I couldn't stand the sight of her bedroom. So I cleared her room up. I didn't want to do it, but I just couldn't resist. Blakely never allows me into her bedroom, as you well know. But I just couldn't go on seeing that mess. It was beginning to stink to high heaven, her bedroom, you know. That was because there was a mouldy old tuna fish sandwich lying under her bed, stinking the place out. But after I cleared it up, that was when I found them.
You found what, Mum?
I found a whole bunch of contraceptive pills in Blakely's nightstand. She's 16 years old, Nina. What on earth is she doing with contraceptive pills at that age? When I saw them, I almost had a seizure.
Mum, you are kidding me. Blakely is only 16. She's only just turned 16. She's still a kid. I didn't get involved with anyone until I was 21 years old. What's going on? You don't think, I don't want to say this to you, Mum, but if she's taking contraceptive pills, does it mean she's been intimate with someone? Someone that you don't even know about? Or, God forbid, one of Mrs. Ferguson's so-called male friends, who, if they have done anything to her, could be accused of statutory rape. Where did she get these pills from in the first place? Who gives birth control pills to a 16-year-old girl, for goodness sake? It's insane! Utterly insane!
That's what I wanted to know.
So of course I confronted Blakely when she got back from school. I'm telling you, the reaction wasn't good. She lashed out at me furiously, asking me what the hell I'd been doing rummaging through her nightstand. But I demanded to know why she was taking contraceptive pills. I told her as a mother I had a right to know what was going on, and she was too young to initiate such things on her own. Too right, you told her. What did she say? She assured me that she wasn't taking any contraceptive pills and had no intention of doing so either. She said she'd got the pills because Mrs. Ferguson had taken both Eloise and her to the clinic and managed to get them the pills. You see, they're going on holiday to Brazil. They're going on a beach holiday together, which you know all about, I'm most sure. She said it was a preventative measure so that the children didn't fall pregnant. Can you believe that, Nina? What the hell is going on in that woman's what mind? Why is she encouraging our teenage kids to become casually promiscuous just like that? But why would she do that, Mum? I keep telling you Blakely is still a kid, for goodness sake. What on earth is that woman thinking? I know. She's obviously deranged. First she gets the kids sexy clothes, which I understand were to wear on their beach holiday. Now the birth control pills to protect our daughter from falling pregnant. That woman initiated all this behind my back, and I'm absolutely incensed. Am I overreacting, Nina? Of course you're not overreacting, Mum. If Dad knew about this, he'd absolutely flip. That is an understatement, Nina. You know as well as I do what your father's like. It's just I had agreed for Blakely to go on this holiday with Eloise. Your father wasn't happy about it at all. But I persuaded him that Blakely would have a lovely time in Brazil, staying at such a stunning resort with her best friend. Finally, he agreed to let her go. He relented. But last night, after I discovered all those contraceptives in Blakely's nightstand, and her explanation as to why she had them in the first place, in preparation for this beach holiday, well, I wasn't having any of it. I told Blakely she was not going on that holiday any more. And let's just say, as far as your sister is concerned, she called me a monster for refusing to let her go to Brazil with the Fergusons. I'm telling you, Nina, if your father knew about this, knew that Blakely had contraceptive pills in her nightstand at 16 years old, he'd have more than kittens, let me tell you. If I tell him any of this, he will lose his mind quite literally. And I will get the blame, of course, for being so blind, because I failed to see through Mrs. Ferguson's veneer. I just keep thinking, what if I hadn't found those birth control pills, and Blakely had gone on that holiday with the Fergusons? I wonder if her innocence would have been taken away from her. I dread to think of it, Nina. Blakely assures me that none of the men that rock up at Laura Ferguson's house have shown the slightest bit of interest in both of the children, which is a relief. And she promises me she hasn't taken any birth control pills, nor has she been intimate with a boy. And you believe her, Mum? Yes, actually I do. Well, that's a relief, but I'm losing my mind listening to all this. Blakely is far too young to be intimate. With a boy, I mean. She needs to focus on her schoolwork, like I did at her age. The fact that Mrs. Ferguson would take both kids to the family planning clinic without your knowledge is nothing short of disgusting. It's like she's encouraging the two teenagers to become as brazen as she is. They're teenagers, Mum. They're immature, naive. They need to live before trekking down this path. But it sounds like Mrs. Ferguson wants her own daughter and my sister to follow her promiscuous example. And it's not going to happen. No wonder you wanted to kill her. She really does sound like a loose cannon to me. And you're right. She can't be trusted at all. I'm very glad you told Blakely she's not going to Brazil. You nipped that one in the bud. Well, I did. But let's just say Blakely is absolutely furious with me. I made her phone up Mrs. Ferguson last night to tell her she couldn't come to Brazil after all. Oh, dear, said Nina. I hate to tell you this, Mum, but Blakely is going to absolutely hate you all summer long, especially if she's forced to stay in the house with you, twiddling her thumbs, staring at all four walls. thinking about her best friend Eloise sunning herself on a gorgeous beach in Brazil. She's not going to make your life easy, Mum. It's probably going to be a living hell for you. I feel sorry for you, Mum. You're having one hell of a summer with her. Blakely is not going to forgive you for any of this. You're going to have an obnoxious, sulky teenager on your hands.
Of course, I know you're right about all that, Nina. But I've just had an idea. Rather a good one, if you must know. I want you to hear me out on this, will you, dear? I don't know why I didn't think of this before.
I'm curious, Mum. What is it?
Is it possible for you to take any time off work? A few days, perhaps. It really would be really helpful if you could do that, love.
What are you thinking exactly, Mum?
I'm thinking that Blakely needs her grown-up sister to speak some words of wisdom to her, to give her some salient advice without her mother being around. You know Blakely. She'll never listen to me. Most teenagers have a derangement syndrome when it comes to their own parents. But you, Nina, Blakely always listens to you. You could talk to her about her life, about everything that she's been getting up to of late. You could mention that she's far too young to get involved with anyone at her age. Discourage the idea of her doing such a thing, let alone taking birth control pills. I was thinking that I could pay for the both of you to get a cabin somewhere really delightful. I could look for a place close to Yellowstone National Park if you like. Marvellous area it is, so much indigenous wildlife, spectacular fauna and flora, as well as wonderful walking trails. And it's only a 6-hour drive from Idaho. I'll pay for everything, of course, because I'm asking you to do the special favour for me, so it's the least I could do. I want you to knock some sense into that daughter of mine. Make her see sense, Nina, will you? Help her see that she needs to enjoy herself before thinking about getting serious with any boy. You could spend some time in the wilderness together. I think Blakely would appreciate spending time with her big sister, and I know she adores the Yellowstone National Park. You know as well as I do. She thinks the world of you. And if anyone can knock any sense into that daughter of mine, it is you, Nina. I know it is you. I have faith in your ability to do this. And right now, as far as I'm concerned, you're my only hope. Your sister thinks I'm the worst mother in the entire universe, so I'm not exactly in her best books at the moment. Nor am I someone that she's inclined to listen to. But she'll take notice of anything you have to say, Nina. I'm quite sure of it.
I appreciate the voice of confidence, Mum, but I hate to say this to you. Blakely's going on holiday with her sister is a small consolation prize, as opposed to going away with her very best friend on an all-expenses luxury trip to Brazil, which Blakely had been telling me about for quite a while now, Mum.
You're right about that, Nina. I'm not Blakely's favourite person right now, as we both know. I will not have Blakely spending any more time in the Ferguson household. Not on my watch. If Blakely wants to spend any time with Eloise in the future, it'll always be under my roof, so that I can keep an eye on those teenagers like a hawk. I don't want Blakely going down the wrong path, or ending up pregnant before she's even finished school. And that's the way things are heading, if I don't watch every step she takes. All I can say is thank God I'm a nosy, very intrusive and discerning mother. Or I might not have found those pills at all. God forbid.
Ma'am, I'm sure I can get the time off. I'll speak to my boss, Mr. Finchley. He's an agreeable man, and he's got teenagers of his own. 3 teenage daughters, I believe it is. So when I tell him your concerns over Blakely, I'm sure he'll let me take time off. I think going somewhere close to Yellowstone National Park would be the ideal thing for us to do. And I'd seriously enjoy spending time with my little sister, even though she's much more outdoorsy than I am. I prefer to stay indoors and read a book personally. But I'll go out on a limb for you, Mum. I'll take her down some fabulous walking trails, and we'll have a great deal of fun together, I'm most sure. And don't you worry, I'll speak to her about absolutely everything, and I'll be as tactful as possible. And by the time she comes home, she won't see another boy. Well, she won't be interested in seeing a boy.
Nor will she ever think of taking birth control pills. Not if I've got anything to say about it. Oh, what a relief, Nina. I knew I could trust you. I don't know how to thank you for all of this. When you were a teenager, life was so much easier with you. You never gave us any trouble. But Blakely is as volatile as a volcano. And if I poke her any more with my criticisms and well-meaning advice, that volcano will surely erupt. Don't worry, Mum. Consider your problem all sorted. Suzanne felt such relief when her call with Nina had finally ended. Nina was such a trooper. She knew if anyone could make Blakely see sense, it was her daughter. If the two of them could spend some girly time together, then maybe Blakely might finally see the light. All of a sudden Suzanne saw Blakely walking towards the car, with her satchel slung haphazardly over her shoulders, and a cranky, bad-tempered expression written all over her face that was so sour it could have curdled milk. She reluctantly opened the car door and slunk into the passenger-side seat next to Suzanne, not even acknowledging her mother, as she rudely stared out of the passenger-side window to avoid her mother's gaze. It was clear she was sulking, and you could have cut the tension in the SUV with a knife. So it's officially your school holidays, Blakely. Isn't that lovely? School closed for the summer, said Suzanne, starting up the engine of her SUV. Isn't that nice, love? You've got carefree days ahead of you, have you not? Where the alarm is not going to dictate your weekly life any more. What life? You've ruined my life, Mum. Thanks to you, I'm not going to Brazil in the morning. And it's all your fault, because you're so mean. Your life is not ruined, Blakely. Goodness gracious me, stop being overdramatic. It's not the end of the world that you're not going to Brazil. I was going to Brazil, Mum, but not any more because of you. I was going to spend time on the beach. Time with my best friend. But you've ruined everything as usual. You always ruin everything. You're so horrible, and I hate you, said Blakely, turning around to glare at her mother furiously. Blakely, I'm very well aware of the fact that you hate me. But the good news is that I love you, although I don't particularly like the way you're behaving at the moment. Anyway, I've got some even greater news for you. You will be going away in a few days' time. Isn't that good news? What? You're sending me off to boot camp to straighten me up? Is that it? No, of course not. Where did you get that idea from, love? I wouldn't do that to you. You're going somewhere very nice and you're going to have an awfully good time. But I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to go to Brazil. I want to go to Brazil with Eloise. I want to go to the beach there. We were going to have so much fun. We planned it all. But you ruined everything, like you ruin everything always. Well, I don't think I've ruined everything for you, love. I think you're being overdramatic about that. I'm organising for you to go and stay in a cabin close to the Yellowstone National Park. Isn't that wonderful? You've always loved that part of the world, have you not? I don't want to go to a place close to Yellowstone National Park. I want to go to Brazil with Eloise. Don't you get it, Mum? Or are you so dim? I told you I would not take those birth control pills. I told you I wouldn't wear revealing clothes or skimpy bikinis, and that I wouldn't get involved with a boy. I promised you I wouldn't do any of those things, but you're still not letting me go. Why don't you trust me? I don't trust Mrs. Ferguson. It's not a question of not trusting you, love. I don't trust that woman. So you're not going to Brazil. Not under any circumstances. Why not? Why are you so mean? Because, as I keep telling you, I don't trust Eloise's mother. Not 1 inch. I'm sorry, love. But you're going away for a few days with your sister. Nina is looking forward to spending some quality time with you. And the two of you are going to have a lot of fun together. I know you are. I'm going away with Nina, said Blakely, unable to hide a spark of excitement that had lit up in her eyes. Blakely adored her older sister. But Nina doesn't like outdoor excursions. She likes to read, doesn't she? Would she really like going to a place close to Yellowstone National Park? That's not exactly her cup of tea, is it, Mum? You are going away, love, with Nina. And I'll have you know she's determined to show you a great time. So even though she's not an outdoorsy person, as you rightly say, she's going to try her best to be more active on this holiday. On your account. Isn't that great news?
I suppose so, said Blakely rather glumly. But I still wish I could have gone to Brazil. Blakely's account. I'm ashamed to admit that when I was 16 years old, I was a belligerent, rather pugnacious teenager. I was the kind of obnoxious kid every parent would probably pray not to have, although I did have my moments when I could be quite sweet. I had not always been this disagreeable, but when I became best friends with Eloise Ferguson, after she had joined my school, I subsequently spent a lot of time at her home, and I found myself being rather influenced by the unfortunate company I was keeping at Eloise's home. And by that, I don't mean Eloise, I mean her mother. I'm afraid to say Eloise's mother, Laura Ferguson, had a mouth on her like a dirty sewer, and she could swear like a sailor. At first, when she used such foul language in my presence, I was visibly taken aback and exceedingly offended. But when you hang around someone for long enough, I guess you get climatized to their rough tongue. I'm glad to say my mother was never witness to this side of her character, for she would never have allowed me to spend time with my new best friend, if that had been the case. On the first day Eloise joined our school, I took it to courteously take it upon myself to show her around, to introduce her to various people, and from day one we hit it off and became almost inseparable. Eloise was exceedingly embarrassed about her mother Laura, and rightly so if you ask me. When I met Laura Ferguson for the first time, I was visibly shocked that a normal kid like Eloise could have a mother like Laura. It was like Mrs. Ferguson wanted the entire world to take notice of her, even if their reaction towards her was somewhat unfavourable. It was almost like she desperately wanted to be noticed, and she seemed to thoroughly enjoy it when people gossiped about her behind her back, of which I knew many of the mothers most certainly did. I had seen the mothers myself, shaking their heads at the school gates, when Laura Ferguson arrived, in her bright pink sports car, to pick up Eloise. I could tell no one approved of Laura Ferguson. Eloise would beg her mother not to get out of the sports car. She would say, "Please let me come to you. I don't want you to wait for me outside the school gates." But Laura Ferguson refused to listen to her daughter. "I don't mind you picking me up, Mum, if you wear something normal, and if you dress like the other mothers do. But when you dress in some of your skimpy, very trashy outfits, people are going to talk about you, aren't they?" "I like it when people talk about me," Laura Ferguson had told her daughter. "Don't you get that about me, Eloise? I've been insignificant for far too long during my life. Don't you see, if people are saying nasty things about me, it means I've been noticed. And there's no such thing as bad publicity, you know. I like to rough up people's feathers. I don't care if the mothers don't like me. I prefer men anyway, because they don't judge me like women so obviously do." I think Mrs. Ferguson liked to shock people, in the trashy, provocative way that she dressed. It was so embarrassing, especially poor Eloise. Sadly, there was nothing modest about the attire that Laura Ferguson would wear. Some of the kids in our class at school were really mean to Eloise. They made fun of her because of the way her mother dressed, so I really felt sorry for her. I mean, she couldn't help how her mother behaved. It was hardly her fault, was it? They called Eloise's mother a skank and a whore, words like that. I think Laura Ferguson thought she was sexy, but in truth she looked ridiculous for a woman of her age, approaching her late 40s. I felt so desperately sorry for Eloise having to put up with the kids at school incessantly teasing her about her mother. One kid said to Eloise, "Would your mother's breasts burst like a balloon if I popped them with this pin, do you think?" And everyone sniggered and laughed at such an absurd suggestion. So all the teasing made Eloise feel so dreadfully small, so humiliated. I would tell Eloise not to take notice of the other kids, and that they would soon lose interest in teasing her about her mother,
and pick on someone else, and with time I'm glad to say the sniggering did subside. Eloise told me that her mother had numerous surgeries because she'd always felt so desperately insecure about her body, as when Eloise's father walked out on them, insisting upon a divorce, Laura Ferguson took it brutally hard and was utterly convinced her husband had left her because she wasn't sexy enough for him. Where she got that weird idea from, I'm not sure. As a consequence of these feelings, it would seem that Laura Ferguson went to the ends of the earth to transform her body, but her new look was so over the top, and her huge inflated breasts were so disproportionate to the size of her body, it made her look utterly ridiculous, rather like a cartoon character. My mother was cool about me spending time at Eloise's home, as other parents wanted to keep their kids well away from that woman, as did my father, of course. But my mother believed that people were judging Laura Ferguson too unfairly and rather harshly, and that underneath it all, Laura Ferguson was not all that bad. But she'd have certainly changed her mind had she heard Laura cursing like a sailor, that's for sure. She believed Laura Ferguson was a woman desperately looking for validation, and she probably was. I think my mother was right about that. This is because, having spent time at Eloise's home and watching her mother's idiosyncratic behaviour with a curious fascination, I noticed that Laura Ferguson would regularly entertain some very creepy men at the house, who would have eyes on stalks when they saw Laura Ferguson's chest. These men would swoon over her like bees around a honey pot, and Laura Ferguson loved all the fuss and attention. It made her feel very desirable. I think with her new assets that had cost an absolute fortune from the plastic surgeon's office, she wanted to flaunt what she had as much as she could, like some people might flaunt a very expensive car, I suspect. One day Laura Ferguson was in town shopping with both me and Eloise, and we accidentally ran into her ex-husband, Barry Ferguson, who nearly fell off his perch when he saw his ex-wife for the first time in a long time. He barely recognised her. His face drained of all its colour, and he didn't look remotely impressed by the dramatic changes Laura had made to her appearance. At first he said, "Is that really you, Laura? Is that you?" And Mrs. Ferguson had laughed and chuckled and twirled around and asked him if he liked her new look. Barry looked at her in absolute horror and said, "You look trashy, love. Why on earth did you do this to yourself? Are you completely insane?" I think Laura Ferguson really believed her ex-husband would find her irresistible after all her surgeries, but instead he looked horrified by what she'd done to transform herself. Eloise was utterly thrilled, of course, to see her father again. She ran into his arms and cried on his shoulder. I noticed Eloise's father was tearing up. He was so elated to see his daughter again. "I've missed you so much, Eloise. You have no idea," he told her. "I'm so sorry, love, you haven't wanted to see me, and I can understand why you've been so angry. Your mother said you needed time to get over the divorce." "But, Dad, that's not true. Of course I'm not happy you divorced, Mum. But I want to see you. I always want to see you." In that moment I guess we all knew that Laura Ferguson had been lying to her daughter all along, when she'd told Eloise that her father wanted nothing more to do with her, and had moved on with his life. It had all been a lie. "Why the hell did you mislead our daughter like this? That's not a kind thing to do. You clearly gave her the impression I didn't want to see her, and nothing could be further from the truth. Why on earth did you lie, Laura?" "I'm so sorry," said Laura Ferguson, at least having the grace to flush a red colour. "I just didn't want Eloise leaving me and going and living with you and your new wife. I didn't want any of that happening." "I thought we agreed on a joint custody arrangement, Laura," said Mr. Ferguson, looking exasperated. "I need to know, Barry, and I'm going to ask you here and now, since I've bumped into you on the street like this. Otherwise I'm never going to ask you. I need to know why you ended things between us." Laura demanded to know. "I thought we had a very good marriage. I was very happy. But you walked out on both of us, demanding a divorce from me. Why did you do that, Barry? I've figured it all out, you know. I've had plenty of time to think about it all. and I now know exactly why you left me." "You do?" asked Barry Ferguson, looking somewhat bemused. "So why did I leave you, Laura? Why don't you tell me?" "It's obvious, isn't it, Barry? I wasn't sexy enough for you. You didn't desire me. Why do you think I've gone to all this trouble to transform my body? It's because of you, Barry."
Eloise's father went on to say that he had never left Laura based on the way she looked. Far from it, in fact. But he'd simply left her because he'd been incredibly miserable during the course of their marriage. He claimed Laura had been so preoccupied with herself and had invested little in their relationship, doing so little for him, showing him so little consideration and thought. "Everything about our relationship was about you, love," he told her. "It was so superficial. Sometimes I felt as if you didn't even notice me at all. I loved you very much, don't get me wrong, Laura, but love wasn't enough. I also loathed all the swearing and the foul language you used every day. It would drive me nuts. No woman should speak like that. Don't get me wrong, I've always found you to be an attractive woman, Laura, so I didn't leave you on that account. I left you because things weren't working out between us. And now look at you. You've had all these ridiculous surgeries." Laura's father told us he was glad he'd bumped into us because he missed Eloise and he'd appreciate spending more time with his daughter, but Laura Ferguson had been trying to stop her from having any contact with her dad. Eloise wasn't angry with her mother's betrayal. I think she was just relieved that her father wanted a relationship with her and had never rejected her, as Laura Ferguson had made her believe. And from that moment on, I was pleased to see that Eloise spoke to her father every single day on the phone. She had already spent a couple of weekends at her father's home and got to know her stepmother Katie rather well, along with her 3-year-old sister Lena, and she told me in the greatest of confidence that she'd really like to live with her father, but she didn't want to hurt her mother, so she was stuck between a rock and a hard place. I didn't have much time for Laura Ferguson myself, but I put up with her unorthodox over-the-top ways so that I could spend time with my best friend Eloise. So we alternated between spending time at each other's houses. I was exceedingly excited that Eloise's mother, Laura, had invited me to join them on an extravagantly all-expenses-paid beach holiday to Brazil. Thankfully, after much arguing between my mother and father over this matter, my father finally agreed to let me go, but he wasn't at all happy about it. He made no secret of his disapproval of Laura Ferguson, describing her as a loose cannon that could not be trusted. I was quite confounded when Laura Ferguson took me and Eloise one day to town to buy clothes for our beach holiday to Brazil. The clothes she bought us were rather shocking. They included skimpy bikinis and skirts so incredibly short you'd be scared to bend down to touch your toes. I certainly didn't want to dress like Mrs. Ferguson, and nor did Eloise, especially as at school everyone described her as the quintessential whore. But she was so excited about buying us all these clothes that I never intended to wear, but it seemed rude to refuse her, so I gracefully accepted the stuff she brought me, knowing full well that I wouldn't be seen dead wearing such revealing clothes. For one, I didn't have the confidence to do so, and two, I think some of those clothes would have made me feel extremely trashy. I brought the clothes home and surreptitiously hid them in the back of my closet, wondering how Laura could ever imagine I'd wear something so skimpy. Needless to say, my mother found the clothes I had hidden very discreetly, and was so enraged with me, she quite literally blew a gasket. I didn't have the opportunity to say, "Hold on a minute, Mum. I don't intend to wear those clothes. I agree with you. They're tarty." Instead, my mother, in the quintessential style of most mothers I rather suspect, jumps to all kinds of wild conclusions. I didn't bother to correct her. I mean, what was the point? I remember my mother picked up the stringy bikini that Mrs. Ferguson had brought me. My face flushed with embarrassment.
"Look at this, Blakely! What on earth is this?" my mother shrieked. "Is this a bikini? Because it certainly doesn't look like one. There is no material on this thing. I can't believe anyone would actually sell this to someone. What are you buying? A piece of string?" Don't tell me you were going to wear this on a beach in Brazil. This is going nowhere near your body, Blakely. Do you understand me?
My mother's whole body was visibly shaking with indignation. Her face had grown furiously red with anger, and she was literally stomping around my bedroom like an angry bull on steroids. She took the clothes Mrs. Ferguson had brought me, marching out of the house, getting into her car, and coming back to the house telling me later that she dumped the clothes at a dumpster, as no one with a shred of decency would dare to wear anything so revealing. Of course I agreed with her on this, but I wasn't about to admit it, not for a second. I was not happy about my mother interfering in my life and telling me what I could or could not wear, so I got rather defensive about those clothes. I guess it was easy for my mother to falsely conclude that I wanted to wear such revealing clothing, which is far from the truth. Imagine my immense shock one day when Mrs. Ferguson escorted me and Eloise to the birth control clinic, only to get contraceptives before our holiday to Brazil, just in case we chose to be intimate with a boy on the beach. Mrs. Ferguson lied to the woman at the clinic and pretended we both had boyfriends and were sexually active, which wasn't true, of course. She told me and Eloise it was best for us to be prepared for any eventuality. In truth, I had not given any thought of getting involved with the boy, not even a passing thought, until Laura Ferguson encouraged us to get those pills. All hell broke loose in my household when my mother stumbled upon those pills in my nightstand. Indeed, you'd think I'd murdered someone and buried them under my floorboards. Such was my mother's anger. I don't think I've ever seen her look so incensed before. I'll never ever forget the way she looked at me, as the colour drained from her face, and she went an ashen white colour. I thought in 1 second she'd pass out in front of me, faint from the shock. She said to me, "What on earth are these?" I could, of course, have lied to her, but she already knew what they were. So I told her the truth. I didn't really have a choice in the matter. "They're birth control pills, Mum," I said, unable to look her square in the face. I felt rather like a dog, shamefully being dragged to its own vomit, and having my nose rubbed in it. It was desperately humiliating, and I don't mind admitting I felt utterly ashamed.
"Where the hell did you get these from, Blakely? And I want an answer right now,"
said my mother, holding up the birth control pills in her hand and shaking violently.
"You're a kid, Blakely. You may think you're all grown up because you're 16 years old, but you've got a long way to go before you're old enough to really know what you're doing. You're not emotionally mature. You're not physically prepared to have a relationship with someone at your age. I know some 16-year-old girls fall pregnant. Some fall pregnant at 14. But I'd have hoped my own child would not be like that. I wanted you to have a childhood, for goodness sake. Please, God, don't tell me you're taking these. And don't tell me you've been with a boy. Please to God you haven't been with a boy, Blakely, have you?"
Seeing my mother's expression so distressed actually made me burst out laughing. Either that or I'd have burst into tears. Of course, my mother wasn't amused when I started to laugh. I finally comforted her by reassuring her, "Mum, keep your hair on, will you? Relax. I'm not taking those pills, and I haven't been with a boy."
"If you're not taking these birth control pills, then tell me, what are they doing in your nightstand? Explain that to me, Blakely. Nobody gets birth control pills for no reason. Why do you have them? I don't want you to lie to me, Blakely. Are you seeing a boy? I need you to tell me the truth. Have you been seeing someone at the Ferguson household? Or has one of Mrs. Ferguson's boyfriends tried to be intimate with you? Because if they have, they're in serious trouble with the law. Do you understand that?"
"Mum, I told you I'm not seeing anyone. I don't have a boyfriend, and none of Mrs. Ferguson's boyfriends have been paying me any attention, if that's what you're worried about. I can't possibly compete with Mrs. Ferguson, Mum. Surely you know that. My chest is so flat you could eat food off it."
"Well, I suppose that's a relief. But if you haven't got a boyfriend, what are you doing with these pills in the first place? Explain that to me."
"If you must know, Mum, Mrs. Ferguson took me and Eloise to the family planning clinic. I was also shocked," I explained. "She said we might need those pills for our trip to Brazil, in case we met boys on the beach.
But I promised you, Mum, I wasn't going to take them, nor was I going to do anything with the boy, nor would I have worn any of those sleazy clothes she bought for us. Let me tell you, those words made fire come out of my mother's mouth, like a dragon. She was as mad as a March hare. I naturally got defensive, but when she told me that I wouldn't be going on holiday with the Fergusons after discovering the pills in my nightstand, I guess I really lost it, and I'm afraid some of the curse words I'd heard Mrs. Ferguson spout out in her own home I adopted for myself and used on my mother, and my mother became even more irate, telling me that I needed to clean my filthy mouth out with soap and water. Your father was right about that dreadful, dreadful woman. Who does she think she is? Taking you to a family planning clinic behind our backs. If she was here right now, I would kill her myself. And I'm not joking either. And where did you learn to curse like a sailor? Oh, let me guess. Laura Ferguson taught you to speak so dirty. In her case, the book is very much like the cover, it would seem. The woman is foul from the inside out. And I'm most angry with myself for allowing you to spend time at Eloise's home. Very angry indeed. Don't be so dramatic, Mum, I hissed at her. They are just pills, that's all. It could have been worse. You could have found a stash of cocaine in my nightstand. That's not the point, Blakely. It's a small relief that it's not cocaine. Don't you get it? You're 16 years old. You should not be taking contraceptive pills at your age. If your father knew about this, well, there are no words. I called my mother every foul name I could think of, and told her how much I hated her. I was devastated not to be going to Brazil. I didn't have any intention of getting involved with the boy, nor taking birth control pills that Laura Ferguson had organised for us. I told my mother as much, but she didn't believe a word of it. She really believed that Laura Ferguson was encouraging us to become exactly like her. But what she failed to understand is that me and Eloise wanted to be nothing like her mother. I was grateful that my mother never told my father about the birth control pills, because let's just say he'd have probably murdered Mrs. Ferguson on the spot. When my mother told me I was going to be spending a week of the summer holidays at a cabin near the Yellowstone National Park with my sister Nina, it was bittersweet, of course, because I had been looking so forward to the trip to Brazil. Even so, I loved my sister Nina enormously, so the thought of spending time with her was very thrilling indeed. I remember my mother was heartily relieved to see the back of me when I left our home in Idaho to embark on the 6-hour trip to our due destination. Of course, I wasn't stupid, even though my mother lightly thought I was. I knew why my mother had organised this trip for me. I'd figured it out. She wanted me to spend time with my older sister. She probably wanted Nina to knock some sense into me. It wasn't long before Nina, during our road trip, brought up the sensitive topic of the birth control pills my mother had found in the nightstand. "Mum's very upset with you at the moment, Blakely," she said rather gingerly. "But then I suspect you know that already, don't you? Mum is so unreasonable," I told her scathingly. "She doesn't understand what she's talking about. She thinks she knows everything. She's accusing me of all kinds of stuff that I'm not guilty of. I can't help it if Eloise's mother is super weird. It's not my fault she dragged me and Eloise off to the family planning clinic to get pills. It wasn't our idea. It was hers." "I know all about that, Blakely. And word of advice, if I was you, I wouldn't spend any time at Eloise's house. I think that mother of hers is super strange. You don't want to be around a woman like that. She's not a good influence on you. And what about those skimpy clothes she bought for you? You weren't intending to wear them, were you? And I hope you weren't intending to take those pills." "Of course I'd never have taken those pills. Why would I take them? I don't want to be intimate with a boy. I'm too young for that. And also, I would never have worn those clothes. They were far too skimpy." "Well, I'm glad to hear it. You're far too young to be taking pills and getting involved with boys. When I was your age, I was extremely naive, Blakely. But believe me, you need to enjoy your life. Study hard at school, stuff like that, before you think about boys. Now let's change the subject, shall we, and focus on our holiday. Where exactly are we going?" I asked, relieved that the uncomfortable subject was at long last behind us. Mum booked a cabin for us online. It really is out in the sticks, I'm afraid, in a heavily wooded area where there's a lot of indigenous wildlife, which I'm sure you'll like. I understand the owner has not used the place in years, so it's been pretty much abandoned, but her daughter suggested her mother fix the place up for holidaymakers who are visiting the Yellowstone National Park. I guess she wisely realised that this was a quintessential opportunity for them to make money. Mum spoke to the young lady on the phone, and she told us we would be the first people to use the cabin. In years, I believe. She hired workmen to move away a lot of the overgrown shrubbery in the wooded area, so that the guests could easily enjoy walks in the woods, which I understand are exquisitely beautiful. She says there's a creek in the woods and an abundance of wildlife. She reassured me that the cabin was inspected to see that it was suitable enough for holidaymakers, and she said she'd made the place very cosy with hot water facilities and Wi-Fi, so you won't be missing out on anything. She also asked me what shopping we would require, so she's ordered all our food, which she's packed away in the cupboards there, as well as the refrigerator, which is very good of her. But we're the first people to be staying at this cabin, so I think she's hoping we're going to give her a good review, but I'm sure we will. The cabin sounds amazing, although I dare say it will be somewhat rudimentary, rather Spartan, because I understand that it's an old miner's cabin.
Well, I guess if I owned a cabin not too far away from Yellowstone National Park, I'd certainly view it as an investment, certainly an opportunity to make money. So I can understand why the women did the place up.
My thoughts exactly, said Nina. Now the question is, how do we find this place? Because it really is very hard to find. I'm told it's pretty easy to get lost. But with a GPS, of course, I teased.
Thank God for modern technology. That's what I say, said Nina appreciatively, as the GPS told us at the next turning we would have reached our final destination. Ostensibly without the GPS, I am quite certain we'd have been driving around in circles, trying desperately to find this place, for even the owner had warned my sister that finding the cabin was tantamount to looking for a needle in a haystack, and by the looks of things she wasn't exaggerating on that. The area we found ourselves circumnavigating was spectacular in every imaginable sense of the word. There was nothing shy or reticently understated about the scenery, that easily flaunted its majestic beauty with an assertive, bold confidence that it would even have outshone Laura Ferguson. The anger I felt about not going to Brazil had somewhat dissipated, as my appreciative eyes gladly drank in all the prepossessing scenery, with an unbridled enthusiasm. This was heightened still further when a herd of bison just trotted across the road ahead of us, stopping short in their tracks to view us with a cursory glance. They seemed unintimidated by our presence, and almost appeared tame. Let's not kid, they were magnificent to behold, so I quickly took some photographs of them. Nina stopped her car abruptly, as we happily watched the herd sauntering down the road at an easy-going pace, as if they had all the time in the world on their hands. It felt rather as if we were on a wildlife safari, in a manner of speaking, and we weren't exactly even in Africa. Put it this way, if a lion had walked out onto the middle of the road, it wouldn't have looked out of place. I suddenly began to feel rather excited about staying in a quaint cabin in the middle of nowhere. It all seemed so wistfully romantic. Nina got a phone call from my mother, and she put it on loudspeaker so I could listen in. I remember feeling grievously annoyed by my mother's obvious intrusiveness, which we could well do without. What on earth did she want, I thought? I was beginning to enjoy myself, and she had to butt in as usual. Ruin our fun, rather like a dog disturbing a cat's meal, by taking it over and gobbling down all the pellets. "Hi, Mum," said Nina teasingly. "Are you already missing us? We only saw you about 6 hours ago, I may remind you." "Have you found the cabin yet, love?" my mother inquired. "I was just wondering, because you know I have been warned it's very difficult to find." "Don't worry, Mum. We're here. We haven't got to the cabin yet, but we're almost there, around the next corner, I believe it is. We've just seen a herd of bison. They were so wonderful to watch." "Oh, how lovely. I'm so delighted, dear," said my mother. "I'm sure you're going to thoroughly enjoy your trip.
You don't have room for a third party, do you, to join you by any chance?"
"You mean you want to join us?" asked Nina, expressing surprise. And in my mind I was screaming out, "Please, God, no." The last thing I wanted in the entire world was for my mother to join us and to spoil our fun.
"Oh, I'm not talking about myself, dear. Good Lord, no. Can you imagine how Blakely would feel if I intruded on your week's holiday? Let me tell you, she wouldn't be remotely happy about that, and I wouldn't blame her either. I certainly am not going to spoil your fun. It's poor Eloise Ferguson I'm talking about, Nina dear. Sadly, she's got entangled in a bit of a mess. Her father sent her a plane ticket to return from Brazil and get back to Idaho. He picked Eloise up from the airport a short while ago. She was desperately upset and in quite the state. He thinks it would do her good to join you on the holiday. Unfortunately, things in Brazil went very pear-shaped, I believe. He says he can organize a car for the 6-hour trip so that Eloise could be at the cabin in the morning. I said yes at once. It seemed like the right thing to do. Besides, I really do believe that Blakely would love to spend time with her best friend. Which means that you, Nina, well, you can get to relax at the cabin while Blakely and Eloise explore the countryside together. Maybe you can get down to some of your reading. I just wondered, are you on board with this idea, Nina? I can easily nip it in the bud if you like. But Eloise would love to spend time with Blakely at the cabin, if it's all right with you. I didn't have the heart to refuse her."
I was nodding excitedly, hardly believing that Eloise would be joining me at the cabin. It seemed too good to be true.
"That's fine, Mum. We'd love to have Eloise join us."
Blakely is nodding excitedly, because I think she'd be very ecstatic to have her best friend here. I also might get some reading done. It's a win-win situation all round as far as I'm concerned.
"Good then. Well, I will confirm with Barry Ferguson that he can organize a car to send Eloise here. I'll give him the details of the whereabouts of the cabin."
"Mum, what is all this about?" asked Nina. "I thought that Eloise was going on an all-expenses-paid trip to Brazil with her mother. Why would she leave that behind to return to Idaho? It makes no sense at all."
"Honestly, it's too awful, love, the whole story. Would you believe it, when Eloise and her mother got to Brazil, shortly after they booked into a lavish hotel, they went to the beach together. I gather a man approached them and started chatting up Laura Ferguson. He was very tanned and was wearing a skimpy yellow Speedo. He charmed Laura Ferguson, let me tell you, and I'm told Laura sauntered off with the Brazilian man. She left Eloise to her own devices on the beach. She did call Eloise and tell her she was spending time with this man, and that Eloise should carry on staying at the hotel and doing her own thing. Well, Eloise felt very vulnerable on her own, as you can imagine, especially when one creep came up to her on the beach and started pestering her. She felt dreadfully alone in her hotel suite, so she phoned her father, who was mortified that his ex-wife abandoned her own daughter to saunter off with some Brazilian man. In truth, Laura Ferguson didn't even appear to consider her own daughter's needs. Barry Ferguson assured me that this was so typical of Laura's behaviour when he was married to her. She's always been so dreadfully selfish, I believe, only considering her needs above everybody else's. He said that that was one of the pivotal reasons he chose to divorce her."
"Good Lord, Mum, I can't believe she did that. It's disgusting. Who abandons their own daughter and saunters off with some Brazilian man? It's a despicable thing to do. The woman should be ashamed of herself."
"Well, she's not responsible, is she? She should have taken charge over Eloise. But she bogs off with this man, wearing a bright yellow swimming costume that left nothing to the imagination, I believe. It seems Laura Ferguson has found the perfect match for herself, as this man appears to have very little modesty. They are like 2 peas in a pod, you could say. I gather Blakely said they were all over each other, like a rash. She didn't know where to look, she was so embarrassed. That poor, poor girl. I spoke to Mr. Ferguson at great length. He's a very nice man, you know. He thinks it's horrifying what Laura has done, but he says it gives him grounds to get custody of Eloise, and Eloise has told him she'd like to live with him permanently. When she told him about the men Laura has been entertaining at the house very regularly, and some are sleazy types, I believe, that rocked up at the house to spend time with Laura Ferguson. He was mortified to learn of this, and rightly so. Anyway, when Laura got off the plane, she was visibly upset and shaken for having been left all on her own. She was left at the hotel ordering room service. It's shameful, that's what it is. Eloise told her father how she wished she could be on holiday with Blakely. That's why he phoned me after he heard about Blakely staying in a cabin near the Yellowstone National Park, and asked if we wouldn't mind if his daughter joined us. So that's where the story is. It's rather good news, I think, for Blakely, don't you think?
It's fabulous news, isn't it, Blakely? Said Nina, turning around to look at me with a sparkle in her eyes. Eloise will be joining us in the morning. Do you want to say thanks to Mum, Blakely? Thanks, Mum, I said rather sheepishly, wishing that I didn't have to speak to her at all. But she couldn't be all that bad, given she was allowing Eloise to join me at the cabin in the morning.
No problem at all, love. All in a day's work, you can say. I think the beach holiday in Brazil would have been pretty lonely for the both of you, judging by what Mrs. Ferguson did, abandoning your best friend like that. Honestly, that woman is the end. But then again, all is well that ends well.
My heart lifted to hear the good news that Eloise would be joining us in the morning. Was I surprised that Laura Ferguson had abandoned Eloise on a beach in Brazil, as she sauntered off with a man wearing a tight yellow bathing suit? I can't say I was. Nothing surprised me about the woman. I could see the scenario so vividly in my mind. I guess I'd always known that the gospel of Laura Ferguson's life was me, myself, and I. I couldn't believe how well things had turned out, as having Eloise at the cabin would be an absolute blast, and it meant my sister Nina could get stuck into one of her books, while me and Eloise went off on an intrepid adventure of our own. As by nature we were both athletic and loved the countryside, we enjoyed walking, running, and exploring. I think if the truth be told, Nina was secretly happy she wouldn't have to be entertaining me all the time, which meant she had some time to herself. If things worked out for Eloise favourably, which I seriously hoped they would, maybe her father would get legal custody over her, and then her life would be so much better. She could grow up in a loving family environment, where she wouldn't have to put up with her mother's unbridled ways that left much to be desired.
Don't you think the scenery around here is spectacular, Blakely? Nina asked me. As far as I'm concerned, this place is gorgeous, and it's not too far away from our home in Idaho either. You'll find this area is revered for its hot springs, mountains, lakes, and forests, all that have been shaped by the volcanic activity that happened here over millions of years ago, so some of the views can be quite dramatic, and given the cabin is so off the beaten track, I'm sure we'll be privy to seeing an abundance of wildlife here, and you're going to like that, Blakely.
Of course I am, I said. It really is magnificent. Well, your mother encouraged me to take you away somewhere like this. She knows how you appreciate wildlife. And you're going to get it all out here. But this place does feel somewhat remote, don't you think? But perhaps that makes it all the more special. 3 of us are going to be together, caught up in this great big cocoon, and no one else is going to be around to invade our privacy. And I think that's wonderful, don't you? The woman's voice on the GPS repeated herself. 100 meters to your right, and you have reached your destination. Nina and I both cheered very happily. I was glad the trip had come to an end. I couldn't imagine facing more than 6 hours in an SUV on the road. I wasn't the most patient traveller at the best of times, and 6 hours, as far as I was concerned, was long enough. I had thoroughly enjoyed Nina's cheerful companionship during the journey. We had listened to some of our favourite tracks together, all with a beaty rhythm, and we'd sung along with various artists to our heart's content, even though our singing was somewhat tuneless. Nina drove her stout green SUV rather gingerly down the long windy path through the trees. The path eventually opened out into a large grassy verge, liberally decorated with evergreen trees. In the background, the whole viridescent landscape boasted a selection of mountainous valleys that folded into each other seamlessly in a prepossessing pattern of voluptuous curves, as if stretching themselves out, rather like bodies on a beach, under a magnificent azure blue sky. One part of the valley descended into a deep incline, which I imagine would have been a treacherous walk to undertake, for it was incredibly rocky, and would probably have only inspired the athletically inclined. A burgeoning mist covered the mountains in a misty white vapour, which gave the valleys a mysterious appearance that was intriguing. I could hear all the bird calls from miles around, and observed a fish-eagle, with its majestic wings outstretched, soaring the heavenlies with such an extraordinary nimble grace. I knew the fish-eagle's discernible appearance meant that water was not far from here, and I recalled my mother mentioning a creek in the woods, which I was later to discover was more like a meandering stream. My attention was so completely consumed by the glorious views that swaddled me on every side, that for a brief moment I ignored the cabin, for it seemed so tiny and insignificant set against such an all-expansive wilderness that went on for ever and ever. The great size of the burgeoning groves of trees and the sizable mountainous valleys made me and Nina feel that in the grand scheme of things we were probably no more than ants. My sister had told me the cabin was an old miner's cabin, so it wasn't exactly a fairy tale to look upon, but I didn't care, and that didn't bother me in the slightest. I hadn't come to the cabin to enjoy the glamorous life. I was here to rough it, and the cabin would suit us perfectly well. Yes, it was somewhat mediocre and rather humdrum, but to be fair, it blended in with the natural environment superbly, and didn't seem at all out of place. Some added features had exponentially improved the cabin, like a generous-sized wraparound porch that hugged the exterior. I'm glad to say that the owner of the cabin had taken the initiative to make the interior cosy, even though it was so incredibly small that there was barely enough room to swing a cat. I was happy that me and Eloise would get to share a bedroom together, and there was a bunk bed in our room, so I decided I'd be sleeping on the top bunk, and that would be non-negotiable. The following morning Eloise arrived at the cabin right on time, and that was when the fun really started. But little did I know that the fun would lead to a nightmare that we'd never see coming. A nightmare which would ultimately throw our reality onto a pair of roller skates, for I would quickly learn that this world is a lot more mysterious than I ever credited it to be. It was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that me and Eloise told my sister Nina that we were going to take a casual stroll in the woods. Nina was unconcerned about our eagerness to go exploring, and told us to stick together and not to be away for very long, no longer than a couple of hours. Nina was not exactly an outdoorsy type, so Eloise's presence on this holiday meant she didn't have to accompany me on any intrepid treks through the woods. Instead, she could settle down happily and read a book, which is exactly what she did. And even before we left the cabin, we saw that Nina was snuggled up on a sofa in the lounge, with a glass of wine in her hands, her nose happily tucked into a thriller that I knew she'd be unlikely to be able to put down. She got through thrillers more than some men get through pints at a bar in a night. It was such a magnificently beautiful afternoon, as me and Eloise sauntered through the labyrinth of tall, lofty trees that seemed to welcome us gladly as we entered the grove. We chatted happily together about how good it was to finally be together again. Eloise told me how lonely and frightened she had been in Brazil on the beach, left to her own devices when her mother abandoned her, especially when she was later accosted by some weirdo, which meant she refused to go back to the beach again and had hidden herself away in her hotel suite, ordering room service all day long and growing increasingly bored. "Why is your mother like that?" I asked Eloise. "Why did she just bog off with a complete stranger? She's not a good mother. She has no sense of responsibility, does she?" Eloise shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. "My dad's horrified by what my mum's done. He's absolutely shocked. He reckons the court will favour him, and he'll get full custody of me, so that I can finally move in with him." "And you want to move in with him?" I asked her. "I do," Eloise said. "I will still attend the same school with you, so we'll still be best friends. My dad doesn't live far away from you, so it's all cool. I guess my mother is the way she is because she's so insecure. She looks for validation wherever she can find it, and I think she finds it in men's arms. You should see the way she was with that Brazilian man. They were all over each other. It was disgusting to watch. I wanted to tell her to go and get a room, but I guess she did that anyway. Your mother should be ashamed of herself," I said in disgust. "She abandoned you for a complete stranger on the beach. I mean, who does that? I guess she's never going to change, Eloise admitted. She is who she is. I do love her, of course, but you're right. She's an irresponsible mother, and I don't always feel completely safe at home. Not with all the men she invites around. What if one of them was, to become really wacko, like the weirdo on the beach? I hadn't thought of it like that, I admitted. As we walked through the subterranean oasis, down the undulating footpaths through the trees that were liberally scattered with pine needles, we could hear the pretty trills of the birdsong in the canopy above our heads, accompanied by the babbling sound of fast-moving water. That was when we discovered the source of the water. It was a long-flowing stream that tumbled through the woods gallantly, rolling over stones and sweeping past us at a furiously fast stride. I suddenly realized that was why I'd seen a fish-eagle when I first arrived here, majestically soaring the skies. The sparkling stream was surrounded by tall, gnarled-looking trees that lackadaisically dragged their leafy boughs into the edge of the water, which I noticed was richly abundant with all kinds of fish. It was so serene and peaceful in the woods, but at one point Eloise and I heard strange chanting sounds, which really was hauntingly eerie and pretty spooky. It freaked us out, for we knew the woods belonged to the owner of the cabin and were private property. So who was making that strange noise? Whoever they were likely trespassing on private land and had no business in being here. In theory, no one should be out here at all, apart from me, Eloise, and my sister Nina. We could hear the dramatic, rhythmic beat of drums intermingled with the flute and the jangling sound of instruments I'm not well acquainted with. It sounded like Native American music to me, rather like a worship chant that the ancient indigenous people used to embrace when worshipping the Great Spirit. I knew enough about Native American music to be acquainted with the verbal pulsations, powerful drumming, ethereal flute melodies, and 5-note scales. But out here in the woods it was incongruously out of place, and there was something so intriguing about the music that sparked our attention and teased our interest, nudging us to move ever forwards down the long twisted pathways through the trees, where stones precariously jutted out of the soil, and ferns and ivies grew together in a tangled chaos of foliage. By all accounts, me and Eloise were completely nonplussed to encounter this strange anomaly in the woods that made no sense to us at all. We privately wondered what it could all mean, and exchanged confounded glances with each other, our faces registering a great deal of bewilderment. Ostensibly, the Indian chanting was the last thing we'd expected to encounter on a casual stroll in the woods. The sound was disturbingly disquieting and very haunting. The notes of the music were middle range, and the chanting seemed to be quite nasal, I thought. A cold chill travelled down my spine, along with a feeling of impending dread that completely overcame me. I began to shiver almost uncontrollably, and my stomach muscles clenched so tightly that it actually pained me to breathe. Something felt terribly wrong. Even Eloise looked as if she'd been quite spooked by the discordant sound of the music. She looked at me nervously and said what I'd been thinking all along, but been too afraid to express. "Something doesn't feel right. That sound is creeping me the hell out." "Me too," I whispered, caught up in a mixture of curious interest that had been piqued and a desperate need to run to the safety of the cabin. I looked at Eloise and said, "Do you think we should go back to the cabin? I think it might be a good idea. I don't know about you, Eloise, but I'm spooked by this music. I think these woods may be haunted. I really do." Eloise shook her head. "Don't be silly. We've only just started exploring these woods. I don't want to go back. Think about it, Blakely. If we go back to the cabin, we'll be driving ourselves completely insane, wondering where this chanting sound comes from. I want to find out what's going on, don't you? And as for being haunted, what does that actually mean? Are you suggesting there are ghosts in the woods playing that music? I don't think so, Blakely." "But why not? It's a possibility," I insisted. "I mean, no one should be on this land, should they? You're overreacting, Blakely. For all we know, someone is in the woods playing Native American music on a radio." "The music doesn't sound like it's on a radio," I told my friend. "It sounds live to me." but the idea of a radio playing out all this music in the woods did seem to soothe my anxiety. Eloise was a lot more assertively bold than I was, and a big part of my burgeoning reluctance was swiped away by her resolute determination to get to the bottom of this enigmatic mystery. Eloise wanted to investigate what the music was, and where it was coming from. If we returned to the cabin, with these questions rolling around in our heads, like the stones in the stream being shifted forward by the water, we'd be forever cursing ourselves for being far too timid to find out what the sound was all about, and more to the point, where it was coming from. It would seem a little voice in my head was warning me to turn around and go straight back to the cabin. But then I persuaded myself I was being a wuss. I didn't want to look pathetically feeble in front of my best friend. I did have some pride after all. Besides, what harm would it do to investigate the source of the chanting that seemed to be drawing us curiously deeper and deeper into the woods, almost as if we were being pulled towards its trajectory by an invisible thread. Eloise appeared to be more curious than afraid on this little soiree of ours, while I was like a lapdog following her every lead, and terribly afraid to stick up for myself. But the uneasiness I was feeling refused to abate, and appeared to be getting worse. I know if Nina had been on this stroll in the woods with us, she'd have told us to get the hell out of there, for something was very wrong, and Nina was governed by her gut instincts and always listened to them. I was suddenly hit with the profound sense that something didn't want us here in the woods, and we weren't welcome among this labyrinth of trees. I told myself the idea was completely ridiculous. My mother had paid very good money for us to stay at the cabin, so we weren't trespassing on private property, and we had every right to be here. I was going to make the most of this intrepid adventure of ours, with my best friend at my side, even though I have to admit at this precise moment I would have done almost anything to be safely back at the cabin, enjoying an ice-cold glass of Coca-Cola with Nina. I knew the best course of action we could take was to be discreet when getting closer to the source of the strange music, as whoever was chanting wouldn't be remotely happy to be spied upon by two inquisitive teenage girls, so I indicated for Eloise to be as quiet as possible as we sashayed through the woods, rather like ballerinas on their points. In truth, we need not have worried about the noise we were making, for the crashing sounds of the stream made all other obtrusive noises none and void. The chanting persisted, getting louder and louder, and in my humble opinion, it sounded increasingly menacing and hostile, as if we were being warned to keep away. But I kept such troubling concerns to myself. We had long since forgotten about our promises to Nina that we would be gone for no more than 2 hours, for we had lost all track of time. The woods seemed to be getting increasingly darker by the second, but I thought that was due to the fact that we were walking in a heavily overgrown area, where no light from the sun drifted through the trees. There was a still breeze brushing against our faces and nuzzling our skins rather affectionately, as if the woods were blowing kisses in our direction. Occasionally the darkness would subside, and a trickle of sunlight would happily shoot its way through the forest canopy, lighting up the leafy green tangle of ferns, ivy, and shade-loving plants that had been happy to make the forest floor their home. The deeper we ventured into the woods, the more physically disturbed I became. I couldn't shake off the hostile, malignant atmosphere of the woods that was becoming increasingly insufferable, as if some invisible force was expunging all the air from my lungs, as my breathing became quite erratic. It was so bad at one point that my anxiety was off the charts. I almost turned around and told Eloise straight to her face that we should go back at once, but Eloise appeared so intrigued about the chanting, as it ominously got louder and louder, with a discernible booming sound, and the music vibrated through our bodies. I knew I would feel like a pathetic wet blanket if I suggested we went back. But finally I couldn't hold my lingering reservations to myself any longer, so I told Eloise rather candidly. "I think we should go, Eloise," I told her. "It really feels off in here. I feel as if we shouldn't be here, as if we're intruding on someone's space. It sounds as even if the wind is telling us to go home. Listen to its moans. It really is saying, 'Go home.' Shouldn't we listen to it?" The hollow sounds of the wind that had picked up speed all of a sudden really did sound like it was telling us to go home. Even nature was warning us to exit the woods. Shouldn't we be paying attention to her nurturing voice, I thought. Eloise glared at me defiantly. You really want to spoil things, do you, Blakely? She snapped accusingly. Come on, don't be a spoilsport. She grabbed me by the shoulder and somewhat violently thrust me ahead of the footpath. We've come so far, Blakely. We're not giving up now. Aren't you even a teensy-weensy bit curious about the chanting sound? You're normally way more adventurous than me. What on earth is wrong with you? Am I the only one around here with any spunk? At this point the chanting was so loud that me and Eloise sprang into action at once. Eloise indicated for me to quickly take cover, which we did behind the trunk of an enormous-sized tree, covered in golden leaves, with a girth so thick that we felt sure no one would see us. It was then that Eloise was pointing excitedly at something from beyond the tree. Look! Eloise whispered to me. Over there! Can you see them, Blakely? I can't see anything, I replied. For a moment I couldn't see anything at all. Rather just an indistinguishable vaporous hazy blur that was so incredibly dense I couldn't see anything through it at all, until the mist began to subside and thin out and become a lot more translucent. That was when I first observed the silhouettes, that were very vague, of dancing figures chanting along to the drum beats. In this ambiguous, foggy, vaporous curtain, they looked to be no more than black cardboard cutouts set against a white background. I squinted in the direction of my focus and steadied my gaze gingerly, while my heart drummed wildly in my chest, for what I was seeing put me on edge and stole away any calm. Not that I think I had any in the first place. I was observing a circle of Indian warriors. They were dancing around a smouldering fire pit, but the flames of the fire pit appeared to be outer-worldly and very unnatural. Instead of being your usual orange or red colour, they appeared to be an icy blue colour, and the smoke that the fire pit gave off appeared to be lilac rather than grey. The Indian warriors were wearing eagle's feathers on their heads, white loincloths around their middles, colourful beads and bracelets. They possessed intimidating war-painted faces, obviously from the tribal makeup, and it looked menacing, almost as if their faces were purposely designed to intimidate. I could not stop staring at this strange little ceremony. It seemed to draw me right in, like iron filings to a magnet. The Indian warriors seemed locked up in a trance, almost as if they were drugged up to the nines. I didn't think they were aware of our presence, and that brought me a small measure of comfort, for I was terribly afraid of what they would do if they saw us or sensed us in any way, for these warrior men appeared rather formidable. I had a profound sense that we were watching a ceremony from another time, but it was being played back in our time-space, if you know what I mean. How I knew this, I am not entirely certain. Maybe it was because the figures I watched dancing around that unnatural fire would appear solid one moment and then almost become translucent the next, and that is not entirely natural. The music was so loud, it was banging violently in my ears and vibrating through my entire body, and I began to shake like a tree blowing in a wild, rather untethered windstorm. The Indian chief was wearing a huge Indian headdress made up of eagle's feathers. He was so severe-looking, I was almost afraid to look at him, lest I should faint on the spot. He stopped very suddenly, his head turned to look in our direction, and that was when I saw his eyes were completely white, and that scared the bejesus out of me, especially when they became a bright red colour, and looked insidiously vile and malevolent. I knew he'd seen me, for his eyes seemed to sear through me, like burning hot coals. I could see smoke coming out of his nostrils, and I had a profound sense that this Indian chief was enraged with us, for we had intruded upon his ceremony. I heard him cry out indignantly, in his outrage, "Hark home fun, Ali!" His yells pierced right through my heart, like a very sharp spear. He shouted out something again, very loudly, in a raspy, deep voice, "Halipaki, Hatala!" and pointed in our direction. I heard a shuffle of feet and ear-piercing yells, "Yay!" As they began to chase after us, my heart began to race in my chest. I knew I was in mortal danger, and so I sprinted as fast as I possibly could. The voices screamed after us in a native language as they pursued us through the grove. There was no doubt these Indian warriors wanted our blood, and if they caught up with us, God forbid. I didn't even want to think about it, for I knew I would never see another day. I remember I was so dreadfully petrified that my bladder burst open and urine trickled down my inner thighs, for both me and Eloise began to run like we have never ever run before or since, for our adrenaline turned up the heat of our endurance like a race car on a track. I swear in that moment I felt my life flashing before my eyes, almost as if I sensed I was living on borrowed time. I rather suspect I felt like someone being chased by a savage lion or tiger, for that was how terrified I was. Eloise cried out,
"They've got spears! Oh my God! They've got spears! They're going to kill us! They're going to kill us!"
I glanced behind me and could see the angry mob descending upon us like a flock of geese, and then in a defeated mindset, I already found myself believing that my adrenaline-charged run would be completely futile, for we were no match for these angry, incensed warriors. They looked like once they caught up with us, they would thrust their spears into us hundreds of times, until fully satisfied that our lives had been finally expunged from our bodies. I was gasping for breath, my breathing fast and furious, my heart thundering in my chest as my knees wobbled precariously beneath me. I darted through the woods, grateful that I had some running experience behind me. All of a sudden, something grabbed me off the footpath and lifted me up in the air. I let out a wild, ear-piercing, shrill scream, and I wondered who was making that dreadful shriek, for it sounded like a squealing pig that was being butchered, and then I realized to my horror that I had been responsible for that unearthly scream. That was when I found myself not looking up into the face of an Indian warrior that was about to thrust a spear into my heart, as I'd expected. Instead, I found myself precariously snatched up into Bigfoot's arms like a child's toy. I looked over to see that another Bigfoot was holding Eloise up, and I was later to learn that that Bigfoot was in fact female. My fear had grown from bad to worse. Not only had we been chased by a bunch of Indians, but now we'd been snatched up by a couple of Bigfoots. Was this nightmare ever going to end for us, I wondered? How could a casual stroll in the woods go so badly wrong like this? I could hear Eloise sobbing. She cried out,
"Please don't hurt us! Please don't hurt us! Please!"
I was choking up so much, tears almost streaming in my eyes. Nothing came out of my mouth, for my tongue was tied. My fear had rendered me completely frozen. I was helpless. I stared up at the Bigfoot with horrified eyes, wondering if it was going to eat us. I knew the Bigfoot holding me up in his overlong arms was massive in size, stature, and girth. He could have easily been 10 foot tall. He was powerfully built, but his face was uncannily human, and that was his only reassuring feature. I was scared to look into his eyes, and tried desperately to avoid his gaze. I was absolutely certain that if I made eye contact with this Bigfoot, his intentions towards me would become very clear. And when you're ensnared in a hunter's trap, of which there seems no escape, it's best not to know the outcome, for it could be something that is far too traumatic for you to digest. All of a sudden I heard the high-pitched yells and shouts, and glanced over the Bigfoot's shoulders to see the Indians purging every tree and bush in the forest as they thrust their spears into everything they could, with an artful determination, as they began to search for us. Their spears were like sharp daggers that were eager to slay their wanton enemy, and there was no doubt they were looking for us. But why did they not see us? We were right there in close proximity to them, being held up by 2 large, great big Bigfoots, but they failed to observe us at all, which was seriously odd, I thought. All of a sudden I found myself looking into the Bigfoot's eyes, and when our eyes met I heard him speak to me in my head.
"Don't worry. We're in a portal. They can't see you. You can see them, though, but they cannot see you. You're safe in here. It'll soon be over, and you can go back from whence you came. But it's not safe for you to remain here. You must leave at once, for they will come after you. You broke up their ceremony, and that for them is punishable by death."
The Bigfoots propped us up in their arms for what seemed like an eternity, and it felt so surreal. Finally, the ghostly Indian warriors that I believe were from another time, who had been searching for us in vain, vanished from our sight, rather like a light being switched off from the mains in your bedroom. That was how fast it was. After that was over, both Bigfoots kindly escorted us back to the cabin, urging us to leave the place at once. I did not realize at the time my sister Nina was going through a drama all of her own. She'd been sitting on her couch reading her book when she heard an urgent banging on the window pane of the cabin. She thought she had to be dreaming when she observed a Bigfoot staring in at her earnestly. This was obviously not one of the Bigfoots we had encountered. She wanted to scream, she was so afraid, but nothing came out of her mouth. That was when she heard the voice in her head, and she realized that this Bigfoot was communicating with her telepathically. "Get out of here! You're in danger! They're after you! And when they find you, they'll kill you!" With that, the Bigfoot had just vanished. My sister had rubbed her eyes, wondering if she was dreaming, until we ran into the cabin, crying out to her that we had to leave at once, for something terrible had happened. I was surprised that Nina didn't ask us any questions. She simply piled all our stuff into the back of the SUV. She didn't even say, "Why are you doing this?" or "What's wrong?" She never said anything for the entire 6-hour journey, which was incredibly strange, but none of us felt like talking. She then stopped her car 3 streets away from our home in Idaho, and then she turned around abruptly and asked us why we needed to leave the cabin in such a hurry. We told her everything that had happened to us in the woods, and then she told us about the Bigfoot that had looked in at her through the cabin window and told her to leave at once, for we were in mortal danger. All these years later, I believe that those Bigfoots saved us from a mob of Indian warrior ghosts, and for that I am sincerely grateful. I had a profound sense that our lives at the time were in perilous danger, for even the dead can hurt you if they're determined enough to do so. I'm glad to say that me and my best friend Eloise still remain the best of friends today. She was very lucky that she ended up living with her father. Ironically, Laura Ferguson married the man she met on the beach that wore the yellow Speedo costume, and from what I've gathered from Eloise over the years, that they're very happy together, although her mother remains obsessed over her appearance, as much as she was many years ago, and is still indulging herself in numerous surgical procedures to fight back the years and to enhance her appearance. I guess some things just don't ever change. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.